Hey guys, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto's own mother abandoned him and tried to kill him? If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comment. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. So let us start the story.
At 6 years old, Naruto Uzumaki was sitting at his desk in the middle of the classroom and not for the first time questioning his decision to enter the ninja academy. "Man, this sucks," he ranted to himself. "I mean, when I decided to join the academy I thought I'd be learning awesome jutsu. Not answering stupid question like who started the first great ninja war," as he looked over his homework from the previous night. While continuing to rant in his head, he was unaware that he was about to be approached by someone who, while only knowing him for the 6 months they have attended the academy, has come to admire him greatly. "Hello Naruto," stammered Hinata, "can I sit here? And another thing, how is this going to help me to become Huh?" Looking up and spotting a blushing Hinata, he asked wonderingly, Sure, but don't you like to sit in the back?" "Well, it's not that, you see Mizuki-sensei told me to sit here," stated an increasingly flustered Hinata. "I guess if Mizuki-sensei says to," responded Naruto, but thought to himself disappointingly, "Yeah, it's not like she would want to sit next to me on her own." Another thing Naruto had begun to regret about his time in the academy was the attitude of his fellow students. Considering he thought that he'd be making friends and that maybe the cold looks that he had been receiving all his life would end. However, the attitudes of the adults seems to have transferred to their children, and as a result the seats next to him would always be the last taken. "Well, at least she was willing to talk to me," he thought. "They usually just sit down and ignore me." Thinking along this vein, Naruto began to wonder why Mizuki was assigning seats today. "Maybe we are doing something super exciting," he reasoned with growing exhilaration. "Wait, maybe Hinata knows." "Hey Hinata." "Yes, Naruto," Hinata whispered. "Did Mizuki-sensei say why he assigned you to sit next to me?" asked an increasingly giddy Naruto. "Like, is he going to have us do some kind of awesome class assignment? Or maybe a team-on-team spar? That would be so cool." In his mind, he began to picture both him and Hinata taking on and defeating the other kids in the class, and then the both of them standing on a pile of defeated students. His little fantasy then went on to the third Hokage giving him his hat in acceptance that he was the most worthy shinobi to carry the title of Hokage. While Naruto was off in his little fantasyland, Hinata was panicking due to the fact that he actually spoke to her, and also due to the fact that in her happiness to be put next to him she did not bother to ask. "I'm sorry I didn't ask, Naruto," she stated with a little apprehension, expecting his disappointment. However, his smile never dropped. "That's okay. It still has to be better than the stuff we normally do. I guess, but the stuff we've been learning is important too, Naruto." "Oh yeah, how so? I mean, alls we've done for the most part is listen to lectures. When do we get to learn the amazing techniques that will make me Hokage?" Enjoying the conversation due to the fact that in 6 months at the academy this was the most he had interacted with anyone. "Well, what if they took us out to the woods for a trap-making lesson?" Hinata asked. "Oh, do you think that's what we're doing?" Naruto cut in. "I'm really good at making traps, especially for my pranks." "Yes, but you have experience with making them. That's a talent not everyone shares," she explained, "and these lessons are to teach us how." "How did you learn to make them?" "Well, I'd go out to the woods and practice on them until they would work right. Sometimes they'd blow up in my face though." Naruto then asked, "Are you saying that if I had read about them it would have been easier?" "I'm not sure, but you may have had a better understanding of what would have worked and what wouldn't have," Hinata responded. "Sure wish someone would have explained it to me before I set up that one with the paint bombs in the teacher's lounge, believe it. I screwed that one so many times that me and the forest were different colors by the time I got that one right." Hinata smiled and chuckled lightly. I imagine it was quite the sight." "Yeah, by the way, you have a very pretty laugh, Hinata, believe it." During this conversation, Hinata had what many of the students who have observed her called a level 1 blush, which was just her cheeks getting red and poking her fingers together. However, upon hearing Naruto's comment she went straight to a level 5, which meant her entire face went crimson and she was seconds away from passing out. Also, there was just one thought repeating over and over. "Naruto thinks my laugh is pretty." Naruto, however, unaware that Hinata's mind had temporarily shut down and not understanding why her face was as red as a tomato, decided to get an answer to another question that was bothering him. "Hey Hinata, maybe you can tell me, who did start the first great ninja war?" While this interaction was taking place, the two were being observed by one Mizuki Toji. The 23-year-old Chunin had been an academy instructor for the past 3 years and had recently discovered just how much he hated it. He believed that he was destined for more than just wiping the noses of these brats. As he was leaning against the entrance to the classroom telling the students who arrived who they should sit next to, he could not help but smile about how his fortunes would soon be improving. Looking up, he notices that Hinata's face suddenly got red and smiled, thinking how thanks to her Hyuga blood by the end of the day he would be a rich man. Just a few more hours and you, my dear, will be on your way to lighting country, he thought to himself with a smile, while I'll be rich enough to finally quit this shitty life and spend the rest of my days lounging on the beaches of Moon Country. His smile then got bigger as he added, and to sweeten the deal I'll even be responsible for the death of the Kyuubi brat. Just then he noticed a flash of pink pass in front of him. Once more slipping into his caring teacher persona, he gets her attention. "Good morning, Sakura." Turning around and looking into the smiling face of Mizuki, she responded cheerfully, "Good morning, Mizuki-sensei." Getting right to business, Mizuki told her, "Sakura, I would like you to sit next to Naruto and Hinata, okay?" However, he noticed a look of apprehension cross her face, so he adds, "Is there a problem with that?" "It's just that my mom said that I should stay away from Naruto because he is a bad kid who likes to cause trouble," she replied, a little afraid of upsetting her teacher. "I see. Well, it is just for today, and if your mother does have a problem with it, tell her she is free to discuss it with me," Mizuki said while thinking, "Not that you'll be around to complain about it." "Okay, Mizuki-sensei." Turning around, Sakura began to climb the steps while inwardly musing, "Maybe he is not as bad as mom makes him sound. Besides, it would be nice to have another friend besides Ino." When she reached the seats that they were at, she thought, "Well, this is it," and aloud she said, "Good morning, Naruto, Hinata. Mizuki-sensei said that I should sit with you guys." Taking her seat, she becomes aware that Naruto was just staring at her, so self-consciously she asked, "Is that alright?" Naruto, for his part, was thinking, "Man, Mizuki-sensei is the best. Not only are we doing something different and probably awesome today, but he pairs me with Hinata and Sakura." Naruto had been wanting to talk to Sakura since the start of the school year due to his thinking she was the most beautiful girl in the whole school. Seeing this as his chance to get his feeling out in the open, he blurts, "You have a nice big forehead, believe it." Upon hearing this, Sakura almost immediately looked like she is about to cry and mumbles, It's not my fault I have a big forehead." Desperate to prevent the onslaught of tears he instinctually knows he unwittingly unleashed, he tried to explain what he actually meant. "I didn't mean it like that, I just mean that it's different." Seeing that this was not actually helping his case, he explained, "It makes you very pretty." "Really?" she asked while wiping away the unshed tears. Giving her a big smile, he said, "Believe it." While temporarily forgotten, Hinata, who was a bit jealous, thinks to herself, "Naruto likes big foreheads." Mizuki, having explained the team assignment to the last student to arrive, moved to the center of the classroom. Getting their attention, he then announced, "Well, class, I have good news and I have bad news." One the students in back shouted out, "Let's have the good news first, Mizuki-sensei." "Very well," he answered happily. "The good news is this afternoon after lunch we will be heading outside the village for a map reading exercise." This announcement was of course met with cheers from most of the students. However, a pineapple-haired kid in the back, who already fell asleep before the start of class, who was awakened by the excitement of the other students, groggily mutters, "What a drag." Naruto meanwhile could barely contain his glee while thinking, "Yes, I knew there was a good reason to get out of bed and come to class today. Nothing can bring me down now." "Now the bad news," Mizuki stated, "is that we will be having a surprise exam on the material covered in last night's assignment." "Except that," thought a suddenly dejected Naruto. While the rest class groans out its frustration. "Now hand in your homework and pull out a pencil, we will be starting the exam shortly," Mizuki said, while thinking, "I do so love playing with their emotions like that." One bomb test later, as well as a couple hours of listening to Mizuki drone on and on about the battle of someplace or another, Naruto was wandering the halls of the academy in a sour mood due to the continuation of his streak of Fs for written exams. Stupid test. Kami, why does it matter if Ancient Gaia fought Ancient Gaia B? It's not like I was around to care. And like a light switch being hit, his mood suddenly brightens as he said, "Who cares, it's just another F. It's not like there is a written test for becoming Hokage, and besides, after lunch we get to head outside the gates for that map reading field trip. Speaking of lunch, I better get going if I'm going to make it to Ichiraku in time to eat." With that though he makes a 180-degree turn and takes a step slamming right into a teacher who was walking behind him, getting knocked to the ground in the process. "Hey, watch it," he shouted. The teacher's name was Iruka Amino, a 20-year-old chunin who had recently joined the academy as an instructor. Looking down, Iruka's eyes widened in surprise at who bumped into him. He had of course seen the container of the 9 tails around the academy, but this was the first time he had actually interacted with him. Despite losing his own parents to the beast contained within Naruto, Iruka could not bring himself to hate the child in front of him. After all, he would be a pretty lousy teacher if he hated one of the very children he would be trying to impart his knowledge to. "You're Naruto, right?" asked Iruka, as he helps Naruto to his feet. Naruto looks up, surprised that the teacher wasn't already reading him the riot act about looking where he was walking. Usually the only teacher who spoke to him civilly was Mizuki sensei, and that was only when necessary. "Yeah," he responded. "Who are you?" "My name is Iruka. I'm training to be a new instructor here," he then added, "and I've heard quite a bit about you." "Really? You must have heard how amazing I am and how." "Actually," Iruka interjected, "I've heard you're the biggest troublemaker in the entire academy." "Oh," said an unhappy Naruto. "Hey, now don't look so depressed," Iruka tells him while he ruffled Naruto's hair. "When I was your age I was a little bit of a troublemaker myself." Naruto perks up at that. "Really?" "Yep, just remember, Naruto, that it's important to pay attention and to learn what it is your instructors are teaching." "You bet, Iruka-sensei. Now perhaps you can tell me where you were heading off to in such a hurry that you couldn't look where you were going?" Iruka asked while crossing his arms. Naruto smiled sheepishly and raised a hand to the back of his head while explaining, "Well, you see, I was in kind of a hurry to get to Ichiraku for some lunch before Mizuki-sensei takes us out on a field trip." "A field trip, you say?" Iruka said with a look of confusion on his face. "I wasn't aware there was a field trip planned for today." "Oh yeah, Mizuki-sensei surprised us with it too." Naruto carried on, oblivious to the confusion in Iruka's voice. "He says it's to help us practice our map reading skills." Did he tell you where this exercise would be taking place?" Iruka asked. "Yeah, he said right outside the village and east of the main gate, and that we have to meet him in front of the academy after lunch," Naruto stated excitedly while bouncing up and down. "I can't wait to go." "Well, I shouldn't keep you any longer then, just be careful, okay, Naruto?" "You bet, Iruka-sensei," Naruto said while running away. He adds, "It was really nice meeting you. I really hope you're my sensei next year." Watching the departing Naruto, Iruka thought merrily, "He's not as bad as the others make him out to be. Honestly, I see a lot of myself in him." His thoughts then turned more somber. But what is Mizuki thinking he didn't schedule a field trip with the headmaster or the Hokage? Also, it's too early in the year for such green students to be taken on an exam outside the walls, at least without a genin assigned to each team to watch over then. "Guess I'll go talk to him during the lunch break." With that though, he began to head towards the teacher's lounge. While in his classroom, Mizuki was talking with the 2 chunin who he convinced to go along with his scheme. The 2 were Junzo Chuda and Zeshin Asako. Both were the type of ninja who realized that they had already risen to the pinnacle of their ability and were destined to spend the rest of their lives as chunin. Junzo, a tall, rail-thin man in his early 30s, whose only distinguishing characteristic was a mustache with the ends curled up like some old cartoon villain, and Zeshin, an overweight man, due to lack of training, in his late 20s with a round face and a rather wide nose, had jumped at the chance to help Mizuki with his plan. After all, the 3 of them were being paid a fortune for the Hyuga girl, and they didn't have to get their own hands dirty in the process. They were just finishing going over their roles in the plan, which was just to make sure that the other children didn't stumble into the targeted team while the Cloud Ninja grabbed Hinata, and then acting like concerned teachers searching for their missing students while actually covering any of the tracks that pursuers would use to follow, when a knock at the door announced a visitor. Both Junzo and Zeshin looked nervous till Mizuki sent them a look that screamed relax and then coolly called out, "Enter." Iruka, who having failed to find Mizuki in the teacher's lounge, where they normally meet for lunch, decided he'd look for him in his class, and if that failed, wait for his return. Smiling at finding him until he noticed the 2 chunin next to Mizuki, apologetically Iruka said, "I'm sorry, am I disturbing you, Mizuki?" "Not at all, Iruka, we were just discussing our plans for this afternoon, that's all," Mizuki replied. "Does this have to do with the map exercise you have planned?" Iruka questioned. Mizuki's eyes widened a little at this, but it went unnoticed by Iruka. However, his 2 accomplices were a little more noticeable, suddenly paling a little. Iruka asked concerned, "Are you two alright?" Mizuki, trying to get the spotlight off of the two, said, "Zeshin, Junzo, why don't you get the supplies for the field trip?" Knowing they have been dismissed, they nodded their heads to both men and leave. After watching them leave, Iruka turns to Mizuki and was about to speak, but was cut off by him. "Now what can I do for you, Iruka?" "Well, I ran into one of your students, actually more like he ran into me, and he explained that he was excited about your taking his class outside the village for a field trip." Mizuki chuckled as he asked, "This student wouldn't happen to be Naruto, would it?" "Yes, how did you know?" Iruka wondered aloud. "Oh, just a hunch," Mizuki replied while inwardly fuming. "I should have known if a problem came up it would be because of that fucking brat." "Well," Iruka began, "don't you think they are a little too new to the academy for such an exercise? And also, you should have scheduled it so that the Hokage could have assigned Genin to help watch." "Don't worry so much, Iruka, everything will be fine. It's true I forgot to get it scheduled with the Hokage, but it is just a map reading exercise and 3 Chunin can easily watch over a group of students." "Yes, but you're spreading them out through the woods, Mizuki," Iruka stated with rising concern. "You can't be everywhere, maybe I should." However, Mizuki cut in saying, "Iruka, calm down. I appreciate the offer, but we'll be fine. Besides, don't you have to observe Daikoku-sensei's class this afternoon?" He then continued while smirking, "You know, before you can be a full instructor for next year you have to get all your observation hours." Cowed a little bit for lecturing a full sensei 3 years, his senior Iruka adopted a stance similar to a little blonde knucklehead, putting a hand behind his head and saying, "I'm sorry, Mizuki. I didn't mean to lecture you." "Of course you did, Iruka, but," he continued merrily despite Iruka flinching and secretly delighting in it, "that just means you care. A great quality for an instructor, you'll define here." "Well, I guess I will go finish lunch then, take care, Mizuki," Iruka said as he made his way for the door. Once Iruka had left and was far enough away, Mizuki looked to the back of the class calling out, "You can come out now." "Not bad," replied a shadow that disengaged from the back corner, solidifying into the shape of a medium-sized man, with black slicked back hair. He was dressed in simple civilian clothes that would not hinder him should the need to fight arise. "How long have you noticed I have been here?" "Long enough," Mizuki stated, his ire beginning to rise. "Perhaps the better question is, what the fuck do you think you are doing coming here?" The man replied while chuckling, "Perhaps you should take the advice you gave that mother hen and calm down before you attract attention to us." Once Mizuki got a hold of himself, the man continued, "Besides, though you would like to know, the money has been transferred to the account." Mizuki, still somewhat upset, responded testily, "I already knew that. Do you think we would be proceeding if it wasn't there?" "Never mind," he said before the man can respond. "Just remember that once you grab the girl you will only have an hour, maybe 2, before we have to report her as missing, and then you will have the Inuzuka after you, and while we'll be able to cover your tracks somewhat, their mutts will be able to track you via the girl's scent." "I wouldn't worry about that," the man replied calmly. "What did you do?" Mizuki asked. "If a whole bunch of people die during this, the investigation will be much larger." "Again, don't worry, I just laced their supplies with an odorless agent that will ensure that the fleabags and their partners will be too sick to be much of a factor." "How did you manage that?" "The Inuzukas are strict with what they feed their dogs as well as what they eat themselves," Mizuki stated. "True, however, after so many years of peace and due to their trust in their suppliers, they do not check what they receive as thoroughly as they used to." The man then looked Mizuki in the eye and then smiled as he saw it, "And as you well know, money can bypass loyalty any day. Also, this op has been in the works for a long time, ever since the last failure to be exact. Well, to our success then." With nothing left to be said, the man begins to disappear into the floor in order to make his exit while thinking, "And once everything is said and done, Mizuki, you'll be enjoying your reward just like the man who allowed me to spike the Inuzuka's food." Naruto, after enjoying a healthy lunch, at least to him, of 6 ramen bowls, was rushing back towards the academy thinking, crap, I'm late. Why of all the days to be late coming back from lunch did I pick today?" However, as the academy pulled into view, he relaxed seeing the assembled student in the courtyard. Mizuki, seeing Naruto, decided to comment, "Well, now that Naruto has decided to join us, I guess I can explain the exercise." Taking a breath, he continued, "As you can see, Zeshin Sensei and Junzo Sensei are currently passing out maps. Your objective is to get to the X marked on your maps and retrieve the item I've hidden there. Are there any questions so far?" Seeing that he hadn't lost anyone, he continues, Each of your maps is unique and will lead you to a different area once you have found your object. Backtrack on the path the map has marked and head to the main gate. Suddenly a hand raised followed by a Mizuki-sensei. Yes, Naruto. Is there a prize for being back first with your item? Naruto asked, hoping there was one, in love with the idea of competing against the other students. A prize him, Mizuki said while putting a hand under his chin in a thinking pose. Sure, why not? Very well, the first team back will get their grade raised to an A on the test that we had this morning. Naruto of course excitedly shouted out, that A is ours, believe it, right Hinata? SS sure N Naruto, whispered a blushing Hinata because Naruto put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her closer while making his proclamation. Sakura for her part smiled and thought, well, he certainly is excitable, and then asked Mizuki, sensei. Yes, Sakura? Well, what if you already got an A? I guess I'll just have to give you an A+ then, he responded. Well, what if you already got an A+, Mizuki-sensei? Then I'll just have to give you extra credit, okay? He replied impatiently, wanting to get them moving. Well class, let's get a move on. A half hour later Iruka was on his way to Daikoku's class to watch him teach. However, his mind was still troubled by Mizuki's class heading out of the village. The fact that while eating his lunch his drinking glass shattered while reaching for it was definitely a huge factor for his continued uneasiness. Pondering aloud he said, I know I'm being irrational, but my gut tells me something about this situation is wrong. Well, Iruka, it is said that a true shinobi should trust his instincts, responded a gravelly voice that anyone from the village of Kohona would recognize as belonging to the third Hokage. He continued, for they will rarely lead you astray. Now perhaps you will tell an old man what bothers you so? Eyes widening he spins in place and bowed slightly, Lord Hokage, what are you doing here? Ha ha ha. Relax Iruka, I thought I'd wander around a bit and check on the students, and also I will admit to being a bit worried myself, the Hokage said with a smile. You worried, sir? Why? Asked a stumped Iruka. Again laughing lightly the Hokage replied, well, generally by now Naruto would have caused some sort of havoc, and the fact that it has been quiet all day has me slightly apprehensive that whatever mischief he is up to will be far larger than normal. Seeing a look cross Iruka's face at the mention of Naruto and hoping that unlike most of the teachers at the academy Iruka's problem did not pertain to the burden the child carried, the Hokage asked, is Naruto the source of your discomfort? Yes and no, Lord Hokage. Seeing the Hokage waiting for an explanation he continued and told him of his earlier encounter with Naruto, as well as his confrontation with Mizuki. He explained, and I just haven't been able to shake this feeling of something being off since talking to Naruto, sir. Yes, I can see why, Iruka, this is most irregular. I will have to remind Mizuki of the proper protocols one should follow before arranging for such an activity. The Hokage then smiled at Iruka and said, well, now that you have worried an old man, why don't you go and check on them just to put my mind at ease, even though I'm sure everything is fine. I'm sore. Nonsense Iruka, the Hokage said warmly. It is good to see such dedication to those you will eventually be teaching, and don't worry about missing Daikoku's lecture. I will explain to him why you missed today's class. However, I was wondering, what do you think of young Naruto? Well sir, to be honest he kind of reminds me of myself when I was younger, Iruka said smiling, thinking back on his time in the academy. I'll be leaving right away, Lord Hokage. Walking past he added, I'm sure, I am worrying over nothing. He didn't notice a suddenly pensive Sarutobi whisper, I hope you are right, Iruka. Meanwhile Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura were actually making good time towards their destination. That was however only because Sakura noticed that Naruto apparently had no idea how to read a map and promptly took it away from him. He was currently sulking in the rear over the fact he was no longer leading the expedition. Even though technically it wasn't one, considering they were only few miles from the village, still to him it was an adventure and he should be leading it, damn it. Of course, when he expressed that opinion to Sakura she displayed her quick temper, which would become more prominent in a few years when she was more confident in herself. Hey Sakura, can I at least hold the map? He asked. Sakura thought about it, and considering they were close to where they had to be, as well as the fact she had already memorized the route, she handed it over. Sakura was having a hard time believing that this boy was as bad as her mom made him sound. If she went by what her mom said, he'd be some kind of monster. Instead he was just a hyper idiot, but he was so nice and he complimented her forehead, something her Prince Charming did in all her 6-year-old fantasies. Looking behind her at him and deciding such thoughts would best be figured out after they had returned to the village, she turns back towards the trail and begins leading them on their way. Enjoying her time in Naruto's presence, Hinata would have been in heaven except for the fact that Naruto kept showering praise on Sakura. While catty would be a term that no one would have thought about Hinata, her thoughts had turned towards the negative in regard to the pink-haired girl, especially after listening to Naruto continuously showering Sakura with such praises as, "Sakura, you're so smart," or "Sakura, you're so cool," or the one that still bothered her, "Sakura, you have a big beautiful forehead." She thought, who ever heard of someone liking big foreheads? Of course, she then pictured herself with a larger than average forehead and dreamily thought of Naruto telling her, "Hinata, I love your humongous forehead, it makes Sakura's look so normal." He then placed a kiss right on it. While trapped in her fantasy, she was unaware that her level 1 blush has steadily climbed to level 3 while her imagination was running wild. That was until she became aware of the real world again, when she noticed a pair of beautiful blue eyes looking at her and the face attached to them only a couple of inches away from hers. "Eep," she squeaked out. Naruto, what's wrong? Are you alright, Hinata?" he asked, concerned. "Your face keeps getting redder and redder. Are you getting sick or something?" No, Naruto," she replied while trying to fight down her blush. "I'm fine, thank you for asking." All the while thinking, he's concerned for me, he does care. "Hey Hinata, do you think you can teach me how to read the map?" he asked. Sakura would probably be able to explain it to you better than me. "Yeah, I already asked her, but she says she needs to concentrate on the trail and to ask you." "Oh, okay Naruto," she replied down about the fact he didn't ask her first even if she told him to ask Sakura. "Thanks Hinata, I'll learn it in no time with you helping me, after all," he said, giving her the smile that she liked so much. "You're really smart too." After coming back to the real world again and fighting down the blush that threatened to send her into unconsciousness from the latest compliment from the blonde, she proceeded to help him understand the symbols and how best to get to the various places the map denoted. She also learned that while he had many qualities that she liked about him, that when it came to learning he required you to put things into simple ideas in order for him to understand them. After a frustrating 20 minutes of coming up with simple ways for him to process the ins and outs of reading a map, she decided to ask him a question that had been on her mind since first encountering the blonde. Naruto?" she asked while pointing her fingers together. Naruto, studying the map, glad that he finally understood what the symbols in the legend mean and how best to utilize them for getting from point A to point B, looked up at the glowing-cheeked girl. "What is it, Hinata?" Why do you want to be Hokage?" she finally squeaked out. Folding up the map, he put it in his back pocket and striked his thinking pose with his eyes closed before answering. "I want people to pay attention to me, I guess." Pay attention to you?" she asked questioningly. "Yep," he said while nodding his head. "People are always ignoring me, and those that do look at me are always giving me these super cold stares. It's why I like to prank them so much. But you know, after today those looks probably won't bother me as much as they used to." "Why's that?" Hinata whispered. He looked at her and, giving his biggest, brightest smile, said, "Because we're friends, right Hinata?" But when Hinata didn't respond, he got a worried look on his face, thinking maybe he presumed too much about how close they were. However, seeing the light fading from his eyes helped bring Hinata out of her stupor, but since she still couldn't find her voice, she just nodded her head yes. Seeing this, he returned to his previous level of cheeriness. Sakura, having concentrated on making sure they were heading to the right place, suddenly said, "Hey guys, there's the river, our item is just up ahead." Looking back and smiling, she says, "Come on guys, I'll race you." Hiruzen Sarutobi, better known as the third Hokage, nodded in passing to his secretary as he made his way into his office. After letting Daikoku know that Iruka wouldn't be showing up today, he decided to finish his walk and then look in on Naruto via his viewing crystal. Sitting down at his desk, he began reaching into his bottom drawer for it, and just as he was about to pull it out, there was a knock at the door which made him pause. Thinking he should tell the councilman, who had shown up for a budget meeting for his district, to come back later due to some instinct that something important was happening. Regrettably, he ignored it as to be courteous to the man and respect his station. Closing the drawer, he told the counselor to enter. While he didn't realize it at the time, he would spend the next several years wishing he had followed the very advice he gave to Iruka earlier that day. "Come on guys, I'll race you." Hearing the sounds of the approaching children, the man perched in the tree let a predatory smile appear on his face. Hajime Moi, official listed in the bingo book as an A-rank criminal, was a former Cloud Nin. However, unlike most missing nin, he did not have to live in fear of the Raikage's hunter nin for the simple fact that he still worked for the village of Kumo. While the various crimes associated with the man were all true, ranging from rape to cold-blooded murder of innocents, the Raikage realized he could use such a man for his more sinister plots, of which capturing a Hyuga was one of the highest on the list. Running a hand through his slicked-back raven-colored hair, he took a moment, while his target got into range, to bask in the joy of how close to success his plan was. As he thought about how he got to this point, he thought, truly Mizuki was a godsend. Having infiltrated the village by acting as a wandering tourist, the Chunin on duty at the gate hadn't even given him a second glance. However, it quickly became apparent that while entering the village was easy, getting his hands on a Hyuga and escaping the village with them would be next to impossible. After all, one of the reasons the first attempt failed was because the Hyugas at their compound were always on guard against such attempts. However, even the Hyuga couldn't be on guard at all times and places. Also, his practiced eye had found several ways to exploit weaknesses in Konoha's security once he had a Hyuga. Such as the company who delivered and handled the Inuzuka clan's food, the man who had allowed him access to the storehouse and then had been promptly sent to the next world as his reward, was a perfect example. So it was while sitting in a bar listening to the slightly drunk Mizuki complaining about his life that he had found the missing piece to his plan. It had been all too easy to convince him to help at one of the few times the Hyuga's guard was down. After all, if you can't trust the teachers watching your kids, who can you trust? Ah, poor Mizuki, he thought as his grin got even bigger. You think your life is about to change, and it may, but only if they puzzle out you helped me, finishing the thought with a chuckle at Mizuki's expense. While he did deposit the money into the secret account Mizuki set up in a bank in Tanzaku town, due to a deal with the bank manager, who secretly helped with Kumo's operations in the Land of Fire, the money would disappear in about another hour, leaving Mizuki and his cronies with nothing but the potential to spend the rest of their lives in a Land of Fire's prison. Pushing thoughts of Mizuki's fate from his mind, he decided to focus on the matter at hand. Reaching into his pouch and pulling out a kunai, he mused, now which one to kill first, Pinky or Blondie? Sakura had just finished challenging Naruto and Hinata to a race and was about to turn and run toward the river bank when Naruto suddenly grabbed her hand. What is it, Naruto? That's where we have to go to get our item, Sakura asked. We should go, Sakura, he replied, his voice sounding small like he is afraid of something, while his eyes looked for some sign that there was something amiss. He was bothered by the fact that the forest seemed so quiet and still all of the sudden. Come on, don't be a chicken, Naruto, it is right up there, all we have to do is search the bank for whatever Mizuki hid and go back, she challenged. If it makes you feel better, we can run all the way back, okay? Not exactly put at ease but unwilling to look like a scaredy cat in front of the pinkhead, he nodded his head in acceptance and they began to head to the riverbank. Hinata, seeing Naruto looking about like he expected something to jump out at him, decided to use her Kekkei Genkai to help put his mind at ease. Forming the correct hand seal, she whispered while following behind the two. Byakugan, suddenly the world around her expanded. Still unused to just how to interpret the sudden expanded vision of her bloodline, she almost missed the shape of the crouched man in the tree that was until he reached back as if to throw something. Seeing the threat, she shouted out to the pair in front of her, there's someone in the tree. Sakura looked back to Hinata when she shouted. However, Naruto looked up in time to see a kunai launch from the tree canopy. On instinct, he tackled Sakura to the ground with the kunai just nicking his shoulder as it sailed past him. Well done, Blondie, said the oily voice of Hajime. Suddenly he dropped down in front of the trio, with his back to the river, and slowly pulled out another kunai and gleefully announced, time for you to come with me, little Hyuga. Scrambling to his feet, Naruto quickly grabbed the kunai that was thrown at him and holding it with two hands wrapped around the handle in front of him shouted, what do you want with Hinata? Why, those magnificent eyes, of course. Hajime replied while taking a step forward. He then continued, unfortunately, I have no need for you or Pinky, so I'll just have to kill the both of you. With that said, he released a little of his killer intent, not a huge amount but enough to freeze them and to enjoy the absolute dread in their eyes. Sakura, having made it back up to her feet, sunk back down to her knees upon feeling the Junin key. Tears unconsciously began falling from her eyes in rivers. The only thought running through her head was, I don't want to die, I want to go home. Hinata was also terrified knowing this monster was here for her, and like 3 years ago the people around her were going to suffer for it. Naruto also wanted to cry. He wanted to throw away the kunai and run back to Konoha as fast as his legs would carry him. The only thing that stopped him was something the third Hokage had said to him one day while standing on the 4th's head on the Hokage monument. Thinking back to it even while in this situation, he can still hear the words the Hokage said, Naruto, the secret of the leaf shinobi isn't the amount of jutsu he knows or the strength of his body. It is the strength that is unlocked only while he is defending those precious to him. Do you understand? At the time Naruto hadn't understood, considering the only person precious to him was the Hokage, and the idea that he would need to be defended by the likes of Naruto was laughable even to him. However, looking right behind him and seeing the silently weeping Sakura and the petrified Hinata, as well as the idea of waiting so long to find two precious people only to have them yanked away from him, was too much to handle. A small smile forms on his lips and he thought, I understand what you meant, old man. I won't let this bastard hurt my friends. Hajime stopped walking towards the trio when Naruto smiled, the idea a 6-year-old smiling in the face of his killer intent being enough to give him pause. However, it did not stop him for long as he began his slow walk towards them again, deciding the boy was no threat. Naruto crouched preparing to charge and growled, I won't let you hurt either of them, you bastard, you'll have to kill me first. Upon finishing the sentence he ran and leapt at Hajime, pulling the kunai back to slam it in his chest. Unfortunately, while initially surprised at how fast the kid moved, Hajime was still a Junin and far quicker. Slipping easily into the airborne Naruto's guard and slamming his own kunai into Naruto's right side with enough force to break several ribs and puncture his lung. Naruto landed several feet behind Hajime near the riverbank. Suddenly the girls came out of their paralysis, long enough to both scream, Naruto. Hajime, for his part, content that the injury to the boy would prove to be fatal, if a special slow and painful death, turned to the two girls. Pulling out another kunai and giving the edge a lick, he said, now for you, Pinky. Hinata, having just witnessed the boy she so admired being stabbed, joined Sakura on her knees. Sakura, knowing this was the end for her and wanting some human contact, threw her arms around Hinata, who quickly responded. Both girls closed their eyes and waited. What is this chakra? He wondered as he looked behind the girls to see if someone was coming to rescue them. It was so overpowering and so close he could not get a read on from which direction it was coming from. Deciding to stop messing around, he was about to just kill the girl when his chest exploded outward, covering the two shivering girls in his blood. Looking down, he saw what appeared to be a massive red claw made of chakra sticking out of his chest. Unable to turn his body, he just managed to look behind him and saw the boy he was so sure was incapacitated and on death's door, standing surrounded in a blazing red chakra with what appeared to be a single chakrad tail waving behind him. Also, and perhaps more disconcerting to Hajime, the boy's right arm was outstretched with the red chakra extended outward until it apparently made contact with him. Hajime's last thought in the world was, what the fuck? Alas, it was never finished because the boy suddenly pulled back, yanking Hajime off his feet towards him with such force that it snapped the neck of his already broken body. After being stabbed, Naruto had a hard time breathing laying on the ground. He thought, so this is it, huh? He heard Hinata and Sakura scream his name and his thoughts become frantic. Hinata, Sakura, I'm so sorry. Closing his eyes, he began to drift off, but then he began to have a vision of that time on the 4th's head. His eyes shot open while trying to will his body to respond. He thought, no, not like this. I can't just give up. I have to protect Sakura and Hinata. Please someone give me strength, not much, just enough to protect my friends. As if to answer his silent wish, he suddenly felt as if molten lava was poured into his veins. Standing, he saw that the bastard who stabbed him was about to slam his kunai down into Sakura. Knowing he couldn't reach them in time but wanting to try anyway, he raised his hand towards them as if to say stop. When his hand was pointed at the man, a red claw shot away from his body. It made contact right in the middle of the bastard's back. It was only then that Naruto realized that he was covered head to toe in the red chakra, as well as the fact that the kunai in his side was pushed out due to the closing of his wound. Getting over his momentary lapse at these revelation, he pulled back his arm. However, he wasn't expecting that the man would fly at him with such speed, and still too weak to move out of the way quickly, The corpse that used to be Hajime's slammed into Naruto and both fell into the river. When both girls felt the blood cover them, they opened their eyes. Sakura was vaguely wondering if she was dead. Although this notion was quickly put to rest as she looked at her would-be killer and saw that his chest had exploded outwards towards them. Her eyes widened in shock to see a feral-looking Naruto who apparently was responsible for the missing part of the man's chest. Just then Naruto pulled back and she watched as the corpse flies back into Naruto, knocking them both into the river. Hinata, upon opening her eyes, immediately sought out Naruto, expecting to still see him lying on the ground. Seeing him surrounded in chakra and looking wild, she comes to the conclusion, this oppressive chakra is Naruto's. With that thought, the fear welling up inside her ever since the monstrous chakra first started faded away. She knew Naruto would never hurt her, and it was just about then that she began to follow the red link of chakra from Naruto to her would-be kidnapper. Gasping at the damage inflicted, she could only watch in mute horror as Naruto pulled the man towards him and both of them disappeared beneath the surface of the river. Iruka, after his talk with the third Hokage, was starting to feel slightly foolish for his earlier apprehension. Guess I really was worried over nothing, he thought while tree-hopping through the forest, having already spotted several of the three-man teams from Mizuki's class. One of which had a black-haired boy being dragged by his two teammates while trying to make it back to the gates. Stopping to ask what was wrong, the boy who was being dragged said that it was too troublesome to race back to Konoha even if they would get a prize. Laughing to himself over the kid's lethargic attitude, unaware that someday that very attitude would be driving him up a wall, he made his way deeper into the forest. Deciding to rest on a tree branch, he had to admit his presence probably was not necessary. And while Iruka had not encountered any of the other Chunin, he had to acknowledge he really didn't want to. Otherwise he would have to come clean about his talk with the Hokage with them. Deciding to swallow his pride and head back to the village, he turned to leave when he was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of horror. Feeling a chakra that he had not felt since that horrible night 6 years ago, the day he lost his parents. This chakra, it can't be, has the seal broken, thought a panicking Iruka. While extremely worried, his ninja training began to take hold and he thought analytically, no, while potent, this chakra is still only a fraction of what I felt when the Kyuubi attacked. Making up his mind, he started to head in the direction from which the Kyuubi's chakra was emanating from. As he pushed himself to travel faster, he thought, please be alright, Naruto. Mizuki was herding a team that had gotten lost back to the trail they were supposed to be on. When he had felt Hajime's killer intent, he also noticed one of the students shiver a little bit, showing he felt it too. But never having felt such a sensation before, the child probably had no idea why he suddenly felt so uneasy. Although, Mizuki did, he most certainly was not pleased about it. What the hell does that idiot think he's doing? He thought vehemently, just kill the Kyuubi brat and the pink-haired harlot and be done with it. However, his thoughts quickly turned to terror when he felt the second, more powerful and far more sinister chakra suddenly drown out the first. The child who had shivered before suddenly emptied the contents of his stomach as the Kyuubi's power manifested. Fuck, what did that fool do? Mizuki's mind screamed as he pondered his options. Should he abandon these children and get the hell out of Konoha, or head towards Naruto and the others to take stock of the situation? Deciding for the later, he screams for the children to head for the village and took off. Halfway to his destination, he began to breathe a little easier as the menacing chakra suddenly faded. Quickening his pace, he arrived a few minutes later and was shocked by the sight that greeted him. A shell-shocked Sakura and a crying Hinata who was trying to disengage herself from the other in order to run towards the riverbank. Both were covered in gore. For a moment he considered killing the pair, to silence them, but the need for information in order to try and salvage his plan won out. Also, he had no idea how far the Ki pulse traveled. Dozens of Anbu and Junin could be arriving shortly. Switching gears to that of the concerned teacher, and with just the right levels of worry in his tone, he asked, "Girls, are you alright? You're not hurt, are you?" Quickly followed by, "Where's Naruto?" As he moved closer to the pair, he could see that they were apparently both unharmed, which didn't answer why they were covered in so much blood. However, before he can ask, Iruka dropped down from the branches. "Iruka, what are you doing here?" he asked. "That doesn't matter at the moment," Iruka replied quickly. "Where is Naruto?" But then he noticed the state of the two girls. "Dear Kami." Pushing past Mizuki, he tried to comfort the girls. However, having never met Iruka before, they shrink away from his outstretched hand. Reassuringly he whispered, "It's okay, you're safe. My name's Iruka, I work at the academy." Something about him put both girls at ease and made them feel like he would protect them, so they suddenly let go of each other and latched onto him. Hugging the pair tight, he kept whispering to them that they were safe. Still aware that they needed information, he tried to gently ask them to tell him what had happened. Both girls began to relay the events up until he and Mizuki arrived. Of course the details were jumbled and colored by the perceptions of a pair of 6-year-olds, but it still formed a relatively clear picture. Then both him and the BB bad man fell into the river. SS Sir. We have to find Naruto. He saved me, and because he's my friend, finished a distraught Hinata. Sensing that Iruka was about to take charge and try to find Naruto himself, Mizuki stepped in, ordering Iruka. "Iruka, take these two back to the village and alert the Hokage. Also, try and get some trackers down here to help in the search." For a moment Iruka looked like he wanted to argue, but considering that was what he was going to say, only the one who went back was Mizuki, he agreed. Picking up both girls who then latched onto his neck, he then nodded to Mizuki and took off back to the village. Before Mizuki could set off to try and find Naruto, the out-of-shape form of Zabuza dropped in front of him. Panting and out of breath he asked, "What happened? Was that the Kyuubi's chakra I felt?" "Yeah, apparently that fool Hajime failed to kill the brat and he awakened the power of the fox somehow." Zabuza, hearing this, started to panic and in his low scratchy voice whined, "Shit. I knew I shouldn't have gotten involved. We are going to spend the rest of our lives in prison or worse, be exec, urgd." Mizuki, having enough of his sniveling, grabbed him by the throat and slammed him into a nearby tree. Leaning in with a deadly edge in his voice, he said, "Calm the fuck down. As far as things go, this can still work for us. The only thing that has changed is Kumo won't be getting their hands on a Hyuga, understand?" Zabuza tried to speak, but the pressure on his throat prevented it, so settled for nodding his head. "Good," Mizuki continued. "Now what I want you to do is find that idiot Junzo and round up the rest of these brats and get them to village." Letting go of the red, going on purple, faced Zabuza, he turned and walked away, about to begin his search when Zabuza called out, "What are you going to be doing?" Looking back, Mizuki mockingly stated with a wicked glint in his eye, "Why, I'm going to make sure my poor student is safe, and if he is, to ensure that he isn't for long. One way or another, Naruto is not going to be setting foot in Konoha alive." And unable to resist the temptation, he added Naruto's favorite saying to the end of his sentence. Believe it. With that he took off down the river to try and deliver on his declaration. Having lost consciousness shortly after hitting the water, Naruto awakened to find himself on his back and all alone on the bank of the river. Trying to remember exactly what happened and wondering why it was he didn't drown, Naruto pulled himself completely out of the water. Thinking back to when he was passed out, all he has was a vague recollection of floating. But it wasn't like the normal type of floating, it was almost like he was on top of the water. Choosing to save puzzling out the mystery for later, he decided to follow the river back to Konoha. He was unaware that he had been saved once more by the Kyuubi, or more accurately as a result of the fox trying to save itself. Once Naruto had begun drawing on the fox's chakra, it had immediately tried to send as much of it as possible. The Kyuubi was trying to force the boy to take in too much of its chakra, thus losing control and allowing it to take over Naruto's body. However, it quickly discovered this was not possible. The seal had instead only allowed out what the boy could safely handle. Once its container had lost consciousness, it found the seal had then shut down, preventing a majority of the one tail of power that was being drained from the fox before from escaping. Beginning to panic upon realizing that it would die right along with its jailer when Naruto inevitably drowned, closing its eye to calm down, the mighty Kitsune began to think rationally. Realizing that there was always a small steady stream of chakra leaving the seal, to allow for Naruto chakra coils to adapt to the Kyuubi chakra in his system as well as for his accelerated healing. If the fox could manipulate that even just a little, it may be able to save the boy, and thus itself. Opening its eyes upon finding a potential solution, it set about trying to use that stream in order to force chakra to Naruto's back in order to force him to the surface of the water. Finally succeeding after a tense half-minute or so, Naruto broke the surface of the water. However, the control and concentration the fox needed in order to do even this little was unimaginable, as it began to feel the strain almost immediately. After about 45 minutes of traveling down river like this with the occasional moment when its control would slip and Naruto would dip below the surface, only to be quickly forced back up, was the fox able to get him onto a riverbank. Exhausted, the Kyuubi had to give the fourth Hokage credit. The Hokage had taken an alarming number of steps to make sure the boy would be protected from its control. Even the small amount that it had used in order to save Naruto would not have been possible had its jailer been awake. No, if it was going to escape, it would have to trick the fool into letting it out of his own free will. Contemplating this, it got more comfortable in its jail as it began to assume a position to rest. Sarutobi was bored out of his mind. The counselor had been droning on and on about his district's budget needs. He wondered if this was part of the man's strategy to bore him to tears in order to get him to agree to the increases he desired. The sad thing was, it was about to work when one of the Chunin who was on duty at the gate barged in. "Lord Hokage," the Chunin shouted, "there has been an incident out in the woods." Dismissing the counselor with a promise to let him know his decision later, he then waited until the councilman closed the door before beckoning the Chunin to continue. The Chunin told him how Iruka showed up at the gate with 2 academy students covered in blood and that he told him to let the Hokage know something had happened, also that Iruka said he would give his report right after dropping the girls off at the hospital. The Chunin then went further, "It had to be the Kyuubi, sir," quickly continuing, while adding his 2 cents. "I knew nothing good was going to happen when I saw him leading those 2 off into the woods. Why, he must have waited until he got them far enough away before he—" "Silence!" roared an enraged Hokage, bearing down on the man with the aura that at one time had made him one of the most feared shinobi in the world. "Since neither of us knows what has happened out there, I suggest you keep such idle speculation to yourself, understand?" The Chunin, unable to respond, merely nodded his head. However, this was not good enough for the usually kind-hearted old man. So with the steel of a man who has seen countless battles and been in charge most of his life, he asked, "Understood?" Why yes sir," replied the Chunin, while snapping to attention. "Good," responded Sarutobi. He then ordered, "Return to the gate and help round up any of the other missing children." Acknowledging the order, the Chunin then shined away. The Hokage then reached into the drawer that his viewing crystal was in and pulled it out. He then tried to locate Naruto with it, however it remained cloudy. Damn, he thought, he must be out of range. Putting it away, he had just closed the drawer when a knock alerted him to the arrival of Iruka. Bidding him enter, Iruka quickly did so and came to stand directly in front of the wise leader. Sarutobi's practiced eye quickly spots the patches of blood that was transferred to him from the girls. "Report," he commanded. Iruka then relayed everything that he knew of the situation, including Naruto apparent tapping into the Kyuubi's power, and the attempted abduction of Hinata. Lacing his fingers in front of him and resting his elbows on the desk. "This is most troubling," he said gravely. Calling for his secretary, he told her to send a messenger over to the Inuzuka's compound to send out some trackers to aid Mizuki in his search for Naruto. "By the way, Iruka, how serious were Hinata and Sakura injured?" Sarutobi asked, motioning to the blood on his jacket with his hand. Looking down as if noticing it for the first time, he responds, "They weren't, sir. The blood belongs to their attacker. I only brought them to the hospital because they had both gone into shock." Nodding at that, just then the Hokage's secretary peeked in and said there was an Inuzuka here to see him. Telling her to let him in, she opened the door and in stepped a middle-aged man with the traditional features of the Inuzuka clan. Looking at the secretary, the man told her to leave the door open. A look of confusion appeared on her face, but she complied. A closer inspection of the man showed his features were quite pale and he was sweating quite profusely. Getting right to business, the Hokage asked, "Ah, good, how many trackers have you dispatched?" "None, Lord Hokage," the man answered shakily. "What?" the Hokage replied, stunned. "Where's Sume?" "She is away on a mission." "I'm sorry sir, but every present shinobi in the whole clan has been disabled by some kind of virus. It's infected our canine partners as well. I'm one of the least sick, but even I would be useless in helping track down the boy." As if to prove his point, the man's stomach loudly gurgled and he suddenly grabbed his mouth. He then quickly about-faced and ran from the office. The Hokage seemed to deflate as the Inuzuka left the room. Iruka stepped back in front of the Hokage and asked, "Sir, permission to form a search and rescue squad?" Looking up at Iruka, he smiled at the Chunin's desire to help Naruto. "Granted, pull members from all ranks, even use available Anbu. Leave with your team in 15 minutes. Don't worry sir, we'll find him. With that said, Iruka shunshins away to assemble his search and rescue team. But will you find him alive? Whispered a tired old man. Naruto was being cautious as he made his way back to the village, afraid that the man he killed may have had friends in the area. Having been forced away from the river due to the foliage, he was currently sitting in a small clearing with his back against a tree while taking a breather. I wonder how far I'm from the village, he thought. It's almost time for some of old man Tucci's ramen, that's for sure. He then spent a few minutes deciding on which of all the different flavors of ramen he was going to eat when he got back. He stopped his musings upon looking at his right hand, the one that he had used to throw that red chakra at his and the girl's attacker. What was with that red chakra? He pondered, and then feels where he was stabbed earlier, feeling through the cut cloth as all he feels is smooth skin. How did I heal so fast? Was it that weird chakra? He wondered, knowing that even an incredible ninja in training like him should be dead from the wound he suffered. Also, he recognized that red chakra wasn't exactly normal. He then came to the conclusion that maybe that was the reason why people didn't like him, not to mention the fact that whatever this power was, it allowed him to kill an opponent he had no business being able to even touch. I guess that means not only do people hate me, they probably are afraid of me, Naruto thought, crestfallen as he pulled his knees up to his chest. He then pictured Hinata and Sakura and a smile formed on his face. That's right, I'm not alone anymore. Hinata said she would be my friend, he thought as his good cheer returns, and also Sakura was talking to me. I'm sure if I asked her she would be my friend too. Getting up to continue his journey home, he suddenly felt the same warning bell sensation that he felt right before the bastard who attacked them showed up. Settling on listening to his gut this time, fearing that the bastard did have friends, he hid in some nearby bushes and made himself as small as possible. Mizuki, who had appeared in the clearing, was not in one of his better moods. Trying to find Naruto was proving to be rather difficult. He supposed he shouldn't have been surprised, considering that even though he was only 6 years old when trying to escape pursuit after a prank, he was almost a genius. He had luckily found where Naruto had come to rest on the riverbank. He had been hoping that the Cloud Ninja had wounded him too severely and that his killing of Hajime had been the Kyuubi's last gasp. Although that proved to not be the case, as the tracks in the dirt led back to Kohona, covering all the tracks so no one else would find them, he began to hunt Naruto down in earnest. What was most troubling to the Chunin was the lack of blood. Based on the details of the girls, Naruto should be on his last legs, not making decent time back to the village. It had only been luck that he had spotted this clearing where Naruto apparently had rested, and by the signs of things very recently. After all, as Naruto had gotten away from the river, he had left virtually no clues of his route back to the village. Mizuki had only gambled that Naruto was trying to stay as close to the river as the terrain would allow, using it as a marker. Presently, he was debating on whether or not he should just give up this hunt and go back to the village. It wasn't like Naruto knew anything, and soon it would be dark, which meant tracking the brat would be near impossible for him. He should just head home, accept whatever reprimand the old fossil handed him, wait for the heat to die down, and retire to the good life. He definitely shouldn't let his aspirations to see the demon child dead cause him to make any more mistakes. It was that desire which had resulted in this mess in the first place. Coming to the conclusion to let fate deal with Naruto, he began to crouch to jump up into the branches when he heard a rustling from some bushes roughly 20 feet in front of him. With a smile about how fate apparently wanted him to kill the nine-tailed brat, after all, he reached behind him into his pouch to pull out a kunai, when he hears Mizuki-sensei. Naruto, having disappeared into bushes, kept his eyes closed. He was so afraid right now. His heart was hammering in his chest so loud he was sure that it would give him away. Hearing whoever it was that had appeared in the clearing moving as if searching for something, he figured he should look to see how close the person was. Opening one eye to take a peek, he saw a man dressed in normal Chunin garb with a bandana on his head. Remembering that's what Mizuki-sensei was wearing for the field trip, he began to leave the bushes, guessing that the sensation of dread he was feeling was just paranoia. Naruto came out of the bushes, jogging toward the teacher, waving and ready to give him the biggest hug he could. Mizuki, upon seeing him, quickly pulled his hand out of his pouch and sent the kunai sailing towards Naruto. Many would say that Naruto had no luck, especially considering his life up until that point, sealed with a biju at birth, never knowing his parents, and being isolated from everyone due to being a Jinchuriki with only an overworked old man and two people who work at a ramen stand for company. Yet, the truth was his luck just manifested itself in other ways, such as sometimes he'd find $100 bills of Ryo lying around. But his luck definitely came into play, such as when he saw the kunai coming at him and realized he couldn't change his direction in time to avoid it. His foot caught on an exposed root, thus causing him to stumble enough to his right so that the kunai that would have implanted itself in his left eye merely cut his cheek instead and sails into the bushes. Coming to a stop and putting his hand up to his cut cheek in shock, he looked up to see the usual caring and nice Mizuki replaced by a man that stared at him with hatred and disgust. Understanding it was no accident, Naruto immediately turned around and darted back into the bushes with Mizuki hot on his heels. Mizuki, as he took off after Naruto into the bushes, could not believe his luck how had the boy dodged his attack. Angered, he suddenly stopped when he realized there was no sign of him. How had he given him the slip so quickly? Realizing that after Naruto had hit the bushes, he had just assumed he had kept on running. Backtracking to the clearing as fast as he could to find some signs of where he had gone. After 5 minutes of frantic searching, Mizuki thinks enraged, "God damn it. How can he be hiding so well?" Noticing that it was now dark and sure that the boy was nearby, he yelled out, "Naruto, I know you can hear me. Don't even think about returning to Konoha if you want to live." Pressing on, he stated, "If I catch you, I will kill you, and it's not just me that wants to either. You know it's true how everyone hates and despises you. Also, you should think about Hinata." Mizuki's face got even more sinister as he continued, "Oh, you should have heard her when I found her. She was so frantic about finding her dear friend. Well, guess what, you little bastard, if you go back to Konoha and I can't get you, I'll kill her and Sakura. Do you understand? Run away, Naruto, as far as you possible can, because Konoha never wanted you." Taking off into the branches, Mizuki made his way toward Konoha, figuring that if Naruto did try to get to village, he would not be able to get past him. Naruto came out from under the log he was hiding under after making sure Mizuki had left. "What am I going to do?" He wept as the full effect of what just happened, as well as the taking of his first life and almost dying twice, came crashing down on him. Knowing that right now the only person he could trust was the Hokage, but having no sure way of getting to him before Mizuki reached to him, or worse, Hinata and Sakura, he truly began to despair. However, a dark thought entered his mind. What if the Hokage hated him too? No, that's stupid, he thought, shaking his head as if to dislodge the idea from it. After all, the old man had only ever been kind to him. But then again, Mizuki was one of the only teachers whom he considered friendly as well, and look how he really felt about him. Choosing to believe that the Hokage was every bit the kindly grandfather type he seemed to be, Naruto pushed the dark thoughts from his mind. Naruto then tried to decide what he should do. Figuring that if he did go to Konoha he could probably make it, even with Mizuki looking for him, especially considering how poorly the teacher fared when trying to catch him when he ditched class for pranks. On the other hand, what if other people wanted him dead as well? While no one in the village had ever tried to physically harm him before, Naruto was hard-pressed to ignore all that hateful looks sent his way. What if it was only the doing of the Hokage that he had never been attacked before? That meant that even should he make it back to the village, he could still run into someone who wouldn't mind seeing him dead. After all, there was always a pair of chunin watching the gates during the day, and they were closed at night. Not to mention Mizuki's threat against Hinata and Sakura. It wasn't like Naruto could just go up to a random shinobi and ask for help. They may be working with Mizuki, or they would just ignore him like they always did, unless he was being chased by them when he caused trouble, and if word got back to Mizuki that he was in the village before he could get to the old man, the girls could get hurt. Unwilling to risk his new friends, he chose to do as Mizuki said and run away. In any case, with him being able to count the people who cared about him on one hand and 2 of them only added today, he doubted his leaving would cause too much of a fuss. Turning to the east to follow the river to a road that Hinata had pointed out while teaching him how to use a map earlier in the day, he began his journey. Naruto did not know how long it took to reach the road. Once he did though, he pulled out the map from the day's exercise, however due to its time in the water it was pretty much useless. It didn't really matter though, because when Hinata had showed him how to read one earlier, she had pointed out various places he could go. Thinking back, he remembered that there was some kind of outpost a few miles north of the river. Deciding for now that was his best option, he chose to follow the road in that direction. While on the road he thought back to his time in the forest. He had heard what sounded like people searching for him. However, not wanting to be found, he had hid from them. Although now with it being the dead of night and all alone he began to wonder if he was making the right decision. Steeling himself, he decided he had to go through with it. Hinata and Sakura could be killed otherwise and the thought of that made his heart clench in pain. As dawn began to break, Naruto finally saw the outpost in the distance. Rushing towards it, he stopped at the entrance and began to read the sign, the Crazy Oxen's Trading Outpost. He smiled at the sign of an ox on two legs in a straight jacket with a wild look in its eyes. Sneaking past the sleeping guard had been easy. He then made his way towards the back of the outpost where there were a bunch of wagons. Climbing into the back of one with a cover over it, he was assaulted by the smell of all kinds of different foods. His stomach then reminded him that he had not eaten since lunch the day before with a loud grumble. Desperate to eat, he broke into one of the crates which carried some peaches. After grabbing as many as he could carry, he moved to the front of the wagon, behind some crates, and he began to eat. After having had his fill, his eyes began to feel heavy. Deciding a short nap was in order due to being up all day and night, he closed his eyes and went to sleep. After being brought to the hospital by Iruka, both Hinata and Sakura were admitted to a room on the second floor. Having been treated for shock and told to stay the night, they had both soon gone to sleep after a visit from both of their parents. Sakura's mother had rushed in and immediately hugged her daughter. With the curtain dividing their two beds, Hinata could not see what was going on, but she could hear. "Oh, my poor baby," cried Misaki Haruno, otherwise known as Sakura's mother. "Did either of those horrible monsters hurt you?" "No mommy, I'm fine," responded a relieved Sakura. All throughout the ordeal she had only wanted to be in one place, her mother's arms. Finally having made it to that destination, she could not be happier. For her part though, Hinata had wondered what Sakura's mother had meant by monsters. Was there another man out in the woods trying to kidnap her? However, further speculation was put to rest upon the door to their hospital room being opened again, and in stepped Hiashi Hyuga, head of the clan, and her father. Following behind him was her mother, who had just finished asking a third person if he would like to come in as well. However, he chose to remain in the hall. Before the door to her room closed, she saw a look of anger pass across the boy's face directed at her. However, she could not fault her cousin Neji for hating such a worthless girl as her, even though it pained her, especially considering that it was widely believed in the branch family that her father's brother Hisashi had been killed to appease Kumo after the first kidnapping attempt on Hinata, and shortly after that her cousin only looked at her with anger. "I trust you are well, Hinata," asked the calm voice of Hiashi. "We almost lose our daughter, and that is how you show your relief, honestly," said the warm voice of Hinata's mother. She then sat next to her daughter on the hospital bed, being mindful of the prominent bulge that showed she was pregnant with Hinata's future sibling. Her mother then wrapped her arms around her in such a tight hug that for a moment Hinata could not breathe. The hug finally loosened, but her mother kept a hand on her almost as if to reassure herself her daughter was safe. While her parents were not as vocal as Sakura's mother on the other side of the divider, their elation at their daughter's safety was easy to see on their usually stoic faces. More so with her father, who, except when berating her clumsiness while learning the gentle fist style of her clan, always presented an image of calm to the outside world. Father," Hinata began, and then waited for Hiashi's permission to continue. Upon receiving it, the form of a head nod, she asked, "Have they found Naruto?" Hiashi simply shook his head no. The truth was Hiashi had disregarded the boy like so many others, not particularly caring one way or the other. That all changed when a messenger from the Hokage had arrived at the Hyuga compound to inform him his daughter had been in some incident. On his way to the Hokage's tower, he ran into a young Chunin who asked if he could spare some men to search for the young boy. Unfortunately, one of the clan elders was along with him at the time and had promptly shot the idea down. Upon reaching the Hokage's office and hearing that Naruto was the one who had prevented Hinata's abduction, he almost overruled the elder when the Hokage had asked for assistance. However, the elder had said all available branch members would be guarding the hospital as well as the compound, waving off the assurances of the Hokage that it was not necessary. Hiashi was furious with the elder. The boy was owed a debt by the Hyuga. He did not deserve to be simply written off. Afraid if he voiced his opinion out loud he would lose the support of the main house, he kept quiet, although seeing the crushed look upon his daughter's face at the lack of news on Naruto almost made him change his mind and assemble a few teams to help. His wife, seeing the subtle battle he was waging, gave him a look that said, "Don't do it." She knew that with the branch family already against him, to lose the support of the main house would result in Hiashi's removal as head of the clan, only to be replaced by someone who had no desire to bring the family back together as one house. After a while, a nurse entered the room and let them know visiting hours were over. Misaki tried to argue, not wanting to leave Sakura alone. She only relented when Hiashi told her the Hyuga have stationed people all over the hospital. After escorting the visitors out, the nurse comes back and tells them to get some rest. Both girls tell the nurse they're not tired, but the woman persists and they quickly prove her right when both drift off to sleep within moments of closing their eyes. Sakura was awakened a few hours later to the soft sound of someone crying. Quickly deducing that it was Hinata, she got out of bed and walked toward Hinata's side of the room. Seeing the blue-haired girl curled in a ball and trying to sob quietly, Sakura asked, "Hinata, are you alright?" Startled by Sakura's voice, Hinata jumped a little and turned around while trying to wipe the tears from her eyes. She shakily answered, "I'm fine, Sakura. I guess all of the excitement got to me is all." Seeing that Hinata was still upset and would probably resume crying as soon as Sakura returned to the other side of the curtain, she told Hinata to move over on the bed. Hinata was confused but did as instructed, and once Sakura was in the bed and under the covers with her, put an arm over Hinata's shoulder and pulled her head down onto her shoulder and then whispered, "It's okay Hinata, you don't have to hold it in." As if a floodgate suddenly burst, Hinata turned her head into Sakura's shoulder and lets out a gut-wrenching sob and began to cry uncontrollably. A few minutes later she began to mumble how it was all her fault they were attacked and that Naruto was missing. "Shish, it's not your fault," Sakura stated soothingly, while her other hand began to stroke Hinata's hair. Why yes it is. This is the second time," countered Hinata in between sobs, "and just like the first, someone else has suffered because of me." "Hinata," began Sakura, "you heard the man, he wanted you for your eyes. He probably would have settled for any Hyuga, it was just you were easier to take than an adult would have been." "But Naruto wanted to defend both of us," Sakura interjected. "He would probably be happy to know we are both safe because of him. Besides, I'm sure he's fine and the teachers will have him back by morning." "Do you really think so?" asked a hopefully Hinata, whose eyes had slowly begun to drift close. "Sure, I'm sure," Sakura answered back, only to see that Hinata was no longer awake. The truth was, Sakura was not sure that she wanted Naruto to come back. That red chakra had scared her, not to mention what he had done to their attacker. Also, her mother had been insistent that she was lucky he had fallen into the river because he probably would have done the same to her and Hinata. Seeing how Hinata had blamed herself, Sakura kept these thoughts from her. Growing weary as well and not wanting to disturb the girl resting against her shoulder, she also closed her eyes and went to sleep. Iruka was making his way back to the village, as the sun began to rise. The search and rescue team had agreed after splitting up to meet at the main gate at dawn. They had used the fan pattern in their search, which had a person go along each side of the river and then the other searchers going along at different angles away from the starting point, the idea being that it was like a fan opening, thus the name. It had been slow going, especially after it had gotten dark. He had not wanted to take the chance that he missed anything. Iruka, who was one of the searchers along the riverbank, had found no signs of anyone leaving the river. The only thing they did find was the body of the attacker. It had gotten wedged in between some rocks. Sending one of the Chunin, the Aburame clan head, had graciously loaned to the mission. Iruka hadn't even had to tell him that it was an official mission ordered by the Hokage to get him to agree, like he had to with most of the searchers. He still was upset with that Hyuga elder who had told him no. Even in the face of going in opposition to the Hokage's orders, he had simply told Iruka that all available branch family members were guarding against another attempt to seize a main house member. Iruka had tried to explain that it was only due to the boy that Hinata was safe. While this seemed to get Hiashi to almost reconsider, the elder had persisted that the security of the Hyuga came first. Moving on and angry because of the fact that having the Byakugan would have made searching for Naruto in the dark so much easier, he had then headed to the Aburame compound, hoping another clan known for its tracking ability would help. Meeting with Aburame Shibi, who agreed to have several Chunin meet him at the gate. However, upon seeing the elation of Iruka's face, he warned him not to put too much faith in their ability to track down the boy. He told them the clan's ability to track individuals really relied on the person to be found being marked with one of the females of their Kakaichu bugs. A little disheartened, but still willing to take any help he could get, he made his way towards the main gate, asking, begging, and even threatening any shinobi he encountered along the way into helping. Seeing the village coming into view, he wondered to himself why he had yet to encounter Mizuki. While his fellow Chunin did have a sizable lead in his search and the darkness had slowed Iruka and the others down considerably, why wasn't there a sign that Mizuki had been in the area? Did he find a set of tracks that led away from the river, and if so, why didn't he leave a marker for those he knew would be following? Dropping from the canopy to the road and running the finally distance to the main gate, he could see his fellow searchers as well as the third Hokage. Upon reaching the village leader, he is immediately asked to report. Telling the Hokage he had found nothing, he saw the wizened leader face flash his worry for a moment before he asked, "Has there been any sign of Mizuki during your search, Iruka?" "I have not seen him, Lord Hokage, but I cannot speak for everyone," Iruka answered. The Hokage then looked to the other searchers, who all responded negatively to having seen the missing teacher. About to send for a fresh team to go looking for not just Naruto but the missing teacher, the third notices another figure drop to the road and run towards them. "It seems Mizuki has returned," the Hokage mused. Mizuki, who had hidden near the village in case Naruto did try to come back, decided to make himself known after he was sure all of the other searchers had returned. Dropping to one knee in front of the Hokage, he reported, "I'm sorry, Lord Hokage. I found no sign of Naruto." "Where were you, Mizuki?" questioned Iruka. "What do you mean, Iruka?" responded Mizuki cautiously, wondering what Iruka was getting at. "I was following the river looking for Naruto." "Then why was there no sign of you?" countered Iruka. "Also, you should have left some kind of marker on the kidnapper's body, that is, if you were where you say you were." "The body was right out in the middle of the river, caught in the rocks." Narrowing his eyes at the student instructor, Mizuki said while barely keeping his voice even, "I don't like what it is you are implying, Iruka. I was running on the water." Continuing, he stated, "As to the body, I'm afraid it must have been at a point where I had left the river." After all, he knew better than to try and say he saw it, considering the body most likely had been further down the river than he actually went. "You just said you were following the river," Iruka tried to say. However, tired of answering his questions, Mizuki snapped, "Damn it, Iruka. I would leave the river when I heard something that needed investigating and then would go back to the river, and before you ask, the reason you didn't see my tracks leaving the river is because I would jump to the trees. I was moving quickly and didn't want to trample any signs that a slower-going searcher would be looking for." "If you were going that fast, how did you expect to find him in the dark?" Iruka asked, not willing to let Mizuki off the hook. Exasperated, Mizuki threw his hands in the air while saying, "Kami, Iruka. The kid was wearing an orange vest with matching pants. It wasn't like he shouldn't have stood out like a sore thumb out there." Seeing that by attacking a fellow teacher who was only showing concern for a missing student that he wasn't making any friends, Mizuki changed tactics. "Forgive me, Iruka," Mizuki said while sounding apologetic. He then went on to say, "It's been a long night and I'm upset with myself. I should have listened to you." "On that we can all agree," the Hokage said, having watched the exchange with interest. While Mizuki had not given away any tells that he was not telling the truth, his answers seemed rehearsed. Of course, this could be explained by the fact that he knew he had messed up and would be facing questions about his decisions that had played a part in this tragedy, or more sinisterly, he had actually set up the attack. One way or the other, Sarutobi came to the conclusion that Mizuki was an excellent liar and would need to be watched closely. With that in mind, he announced, "All of you go home and rest. Those of you who are teachers, the academy has been closed for the day. Mizuki and Iruka, I would like you to stay a moment longer." Waiting for the other searchers to leave, and once gone, the Hokage addressed the remaining Chunin. "Mizuki, your decision to take these children on this exercise without following proper protocols is directly responsible for this mess. You are hereby suspended until a full investigation of this tragedy has been completed. Now leave." Mizuki looked like he wanted to say something but knew better. What neither man saw was Mizuki's smirk as he left, thinking, "Investigate to your heart's content, you old fool. There isn't any direct evidence linking me to this. Then after you're done and I'm in the clear, a very contrite teacher will have to inform you that due to the loss of his precious student, he will just have to retire." As Mizuki was leaving, the Hokage noticed Iruka staring intently at his fellow Chunin's retreating form. "What is it, Iruka?" read the Hokage. "I believe Mizuki isn't telling the whole truth on the matter, sir," answered Iruka. Nodding his head, Sarutobi said, "Walk with me, Iruka. As they began walking back to the Hokage's tower, he said while chuckling lightly, "You know, if these feelings of yours continue to prove accurate, I'll have to fire my advisors and put you in their place." Iruka, embarrassed at his leader's praise, remained silent, so the third continued, on a more serious note, "I fear you are correct. However, please do not let him know of your suspicions, that way perhaps he will lower his guard and get careless." "Sir, what of his class?" Iruka wondered. "Ah, always thinking of the children, Iruka," the Hokage said while smiling. However, his face became serious a moment later as he stated, "Well, Mizuki has taught his last class regardless of how the investigation turns out. His gross lack of ensuring his students' safety cannot be ignored." His smile then returned as he continued, "The truth is I have someone in mind, so he had best get home to get some rest, for tomorrow he will be taking over." Nodding at the Hokage's words until a look of understanding crossed his face, he then pointed his thumb towards himself as he stammered in surprise, "Me Lord Hokage, I still have at least a half year of observation to perform before I can be an instructor." Laughing at Iruka's stunned face, the Hokage replied, "Perhaps, but you have already demonstrated all the necessary qualities that an instructor should have." He then stated more seriously, "The truth is, Iruka, I know you will make a fine instructor and was greatly pleased when you choose to join the academy as one. So if in order to get you in front of the classroom where you belong I had to bend a few rules to do so, well, I am the Hokage." Face flushed from the praise of the Hokage, Iruka said, "Thank you, sir, I'm honored you think so highly of me, but I was hoping to be part of the next group to go looking for Naruto. I am pleased to see you worry about him so, Iruka. However, the next search and rescue team is leaving in 10 minutes and you need to rest." Sarutobi then added, "Also, I fear that until the Inuzuka are back on their feet we will just be wasting our time unless someone gets lucky out there. I would prefer that you assume Mizuki's former responsibilities." Iruka, knowing that the Hokage had made up his mind, bowed as he said, "Yes sir, and again thank you for having such faith in me. Well then I had best get some sleep." He then turns to begin heading off to his apartment. Watching him leave, Sarutobi thought, "I have no doubt you will prove me right, Iruka. The will of fire burns strongly in you and you will undoubtedly pass it along to those you teach, providing the village with many strong and dedicated shinobi." Smiling at the thought of the future of the leaf, his face then returned to a more somber one, as he hoped that his best tracker next to the Inuzuka would return promptly from his mission. Akihiro Yasuki, the owner of the wagon that Naruto had stowed away in, was a large man who, while carrying a little extra weight, was still in very good shape. He was middle-aged and bald but had a brown goatee, his eyes were also brown. Furthermore, he was dressed in the colorful garb that most traders wore so as to draw the attention of potential customers. He had come to the Crazy Ox for the same reason most traders stopped there. It was a relatively secure place at a popular crossroads where he could engage in transactions with customers and his fellow traders. After arriving and parking his wagon in back with the others, he had set up his stall for the next day and gone to sleep. At just before dawn the following morning he had woken from the front seat of his wagon and had freshened up. As he made his way to his stall he thought he saw something by his wagon but blew it off as having yet to have his morning cup of tea. Now that it was late afternoon he was heading back to the wagon, generally pleased with how the past couple days had been going. "Akihiro, old boy, you've done it again," he thought while waving to a pair of his fellow merchants. He had made a killing today and even unloaded some old merchandise for a considerable amount more than he expected. Couple that with the fact that the night before he had been able to arrange a trade that allowed him to acquire some tea country peaches, and he was looking at this trip being his most profitable yet. Reaching the back of the wagon, he climbed in only to see one of the crates of his peaches had been broken into. "Well, so much for honor among traders," he said, a little dismayed. Naruto had awoken when the big man had stepped into the back of the wagon and begun cursing internally to himself, "Stupid, stupid, how could I just fall asleep in here?" as he crouched behind the crates he was behind. Seeing the man sit with his back to him he began to feel guilty. Yeah, he had been run out of his home, but that didn't give him the right to become a thief. Coming out from where he was hiding he approached the man who was still counting peaches and tapped him on the shoulder. Mister. Akihiro for his part did not even consider the fact that he wasn't alone in the wagon, and upon being tapped on the shoulder gave out a shriek that much to his embarrassment sounded like a young woman. "Ah!" Naruto backed up in fright when the man had screamed. Akihiro, turning and still a little shaken, he said, "Kami boy, you damn near gave me a heart attack." Then his face turned angry as he asked, "You wouldn't happen to be my peach thief, would you?" With his head down due to embarrassment and his voice filled with shame, Naruto replied, "Yeah. Sorry mister, I was running last night and snuck in here to hide, and since I hadn't eaten anything and they smelled so good, well, I just couldn't help it." "Aren't you a little young to be out here by yourself at night?" Akihiro asked. Naruto, not wanting to tell the man the truth, came up with an excuse on the fly. "I'm a shinobi and I'm on a training exercise." "What kind of exercise?" Akihiro asked, his voice tinged with concern considering he had a couple of rugrats the boy's age. "Has a boy as young as you out here at night by himself?" "The tough kind, believe it," Naruto said with a smile considering the man didn't seem to still be mad about his stolen peaches. "Ha ha, ask a stupid question I suppose," Akihiro said. Naruto, a little confused by what the man meant, just tilted his head to the side with his eyes squinted. He then continued, "But you said you were running and I assume needed to hide. Were you being chased?" Naruto said while nodding his head up and down. "I am supposed to hide from the teachers for as long as possible, while trying to make it to a place on my map." "I don't know," Akihiro said, his voice full of doubt. "Sounds to me like you're trying to pull a fast one on me, kid." "Really mister, I've heard of kids my age being full-fledged ninja, not just academy students like me. Believe it," Naruto said, trying to convince the man of the half-truth. After all, he was being chased, and if his teacher caught him, he would fail. Except this time failure meant death. Besides, this little test is nothing to a future Hokage. "Ah, so you're from the Leaf," Akihiro said, oblivious to the small grimace that passed over Naruto's face for a moment. Naruto hadn't wanted to give the man a clear idea from where he was from in case he didn't believe him and would try to take him back. However, realizing he trapped himself, he nodded his head. Ironically enough, that tidbit of information was enough to sell Akihiro, as he thought. "Oh well, I guess they're starting them younger and younger." "So where are you heading?" he asked. Naruto, looking embarrassed. "Well, you see, my map got ruined, so I'm not sure where I have to go anymore." Understanding, Akihiro rummaged in one of his packs in the wagon, pulling out a map, and after unfolding it he handed it to Naruto. As he looked over the map, he realized he hadn't really considered where he was going to go. There was Border Town to the west, and from there he could enter Rain Country and just keep going. However, that path would take him in the direction of Kohona. Also, most of those countries were friends to the Leaf, therefore he may be more likely to encounter Leaf Shinobi, an idea he didn't exactly like. North and south were equally unappealing for various reasons, so with only one direction left to go, he pointed to one of the furthest cities on the map, Port City. He figured once he got there he could jump onto a ship leaving for another country. Seeing where the kid pointed, Akihiro said, "Port City? Well kid, looks like you're in luck. I have business there myself. You can ride with me, and besides it'll give you a chance to work off what you owe for those peaches you ate, unless you got the money, that is." Naruto, pulling out a frog wallet he called Gamachan, which was a present someone had left in front of his apartment door on his 5th birthday. However, there was no need to look inside, as it was plain to see that it had been on a diet for some time, to which Naruto gave a small pout. Laughing loudly, Akihiro told him, "That's alright, like I said, I'm heading that way to offload those peaches. They're a delicacy in the land of water. You'll work for me till we get there in about 2 days. You can start by helping me bring my remaining merchandise from the stall into the wagon." Snapping a salute, the boy walked past him and began to get out of the wagon until it dawned on him he had no idea where the man's stall was. He stopped and asked, "Where's your stall?" Roaring with laughter, Akihiro said, "I'll show you. By the way, what should I call?" "You can call me Akihiro." Not willing to give his real name, he said the first thing that popped into his mind, "My name is Miso." "Okay, that's a weird name, kid," uttered Akihiro. "Yep, my parents must have really liked it, huh? Considering I was raised on miso ramen, I shouldn't be surprised," Naruto said, trying to cover the fact that when he was asked for a name his mind blanked and the first thing to come in, it was a flavor of ramen. "Well Miso, let's get moving. I want to be out of here by nightfall, and besides," Akihiro said while looking out the flap of the wagon, "looks like a storm's coming this way." Kakashi Hitaki was tired. These long-rank solo Anbu Black Op missions were killers. His job had been to find a daughter of a noblewoman, rescue her, and eliminate her kidnappers all in one go. What had made this particular job all the more of a hassle was the fact that instead of a dainty noble, he had to rescue one that could stand to miss a meal or 6, and of course the kidnappers just had to hire a missing-nin as support. In the end he had succeeded, but his back was going to need a nice long soak. It certainly wasn't easy to carry someone of that size at full speed while dodging enemy jutsu. Oh well, he thought with good cheer, nobody ever said being Anbu was going to be easy. The sun was just setting as the gates of Kahona were coming into view. He noticed a gathering out front of the main gate. Deciding to find out what was going on, he adjusted his course to approach the Chunin in charge. Upon getting closer, the Chunin, a young woman roughly about the same age as him with striking red eyes, noticed him and seeing his easy pace instead ran up to him. "Dog, the Hokage wishes for you to report to him right away," the Chunin told Kakashi with some urgency. "Very well," he said, not very motivated. After all, if the Hokage wanted him to report that badly, he would probably be sent out on another mission right away, and he had just picked up this new book that he was really interested in reading. But orders were orders, so with a nod he quickly shunned Shinzed to the Hokage tower. Appearing in front of the Hokage's door and receiving a dirty look from the secretary for all the leaves the jutsu deposited, he knocked on the door and entered. Seeing the Hokage, he immediately knew something bad had happened, for the village leader looked as if he has gone without sleep for quite some time. Once he is in front of the desk, he stood at attention saying, "Dog reporting his order, sir." "At ease, dog," commanded the Hokage, and then goes on to say, "You may remove your mask, Kakashi." Kakashi took off the Anbu dog mask, setting it on his belt while waiting for the Hokage to compose his thoughts. "First off, Kakashi, I trust your mission was successful." Upon receiving a nod from him, the Hokage then went on to say, "I'm sorry I have to send you out again so soon, but a matter has arisen and I need your talents once more." "Does this have anything to do with the shinobi at the gate, sir?" Kakashi asked. "Yes, Naruto is missing, and possible injured or worse," the Hokage answered with a voice filled with pain and regret. What happened?" questioned a stunned Kakashi, "and why haven't the Inuzuka been able to locate him?" "We believe that the Inuzuka have been poisoned, preventing them from joining the search." Before Kakashi could inquire about that, the Hokage went on to explain the previous day's events. Getting up from the desk, the aged leader looked outside, seeing lightning in the distance, and turning to face Kakashi, he said, "With this storm approaching, I need you to head out right away, before any evidence of his location is washed away." "Yes, Lord Hokage," accepting his mission without hesitation and with thoughts of relaxing with his new book furthest from his mind, he took off for Naruto's apartment. Upon reaching it, he went inside to find something he could use to give his nindogs a scent to follow. Seeing the apartment was quite messy, he moved to the bedroom, stopping by the bed. He then picked up Naruto's sleeping cap. It had been a birthday gift to him from Kakashi. Looking at it, he thought back with some anger to how the third had ordered him and Jiraiya to give Naruto a wide berth. The Hokage had not wanted the secret of Naruto's parentage to get out, and not just to enemies from outside Konoha's walls but within. Therefore, he and Jiraiya were forced to watch Naruto grow from a distance. After all, if you had two men so closely tied to the fourth Hokage looking after an orphaned blonde-haired boy, well, even the slowest of people would be able to connect the dots. But that didn't stop them from trying to do what they could to make Naruto's life better, such as leaving birthday gifts at his front door, making sure to keep him in free ramen coupons, and hell, Jiraiya had bought Naruto's apartment building. While he still paid rent, it was all going into a high-yield bank account that Naruto would receive upon making it to Junin, or he learned the truth, whichever came first. Pushing such thoughts aside, he took the cap with him as he made his way outside the village. Once outside the main gate of the village, he summoned Pakun, one of his nindog. "Hey Kakashi, long time no see," the small pug-like dog said in his rough voice. "Sorry Pakun, no time for pleasantries," Kakashi said while kneeling down. He then pulled out the cap, presenting it to the summons. "Here, take a whiff of this. I need you to follow the scent." "No problem, but who are we looking for?" the dog asked. "Sensei's legacy," whispered a pessimistic Kakashi, particularly considering that searchers have been looking since yesterday with no sign of Naruto, and he feared that he was no longer among the living. Pakun, nodding in understanding, took off in the direction of the scent trail with Kakashi close behind. They quickly arrived at the place where the kidnapper tried to ambush the children. Arriving, Pakun began sniffing around, then said, "I have 7 scents here, Kakashi." 7? Kakashi asked, trying to figure out which was which based on what the Hokage had told him. "Yep," Pakun said. Then he begs in, trying to explain what it was he was smelling. "I have one that, based on the amount of things he marked, was probably here the longest." It also disappears at the waterline with Naruto's scent. I have 3 others. 2 arrived here with Naruto but left with an unknown person back to Kahona, and the last 2 arrived from different directions and met here then split up. One went up river, the other back into the forest. Kakashi took it all in and thought, according to what the Hokage told me, the ambusher and Naruto fell into the river. Okay, so that means the 3 that headed to the village was the Chunin, Iruka, and the 2 girls. The one that headed up river must be Naruto's teacher Mizuki, and the other I don't know, perhaps one of the other teachers. Believing he had a clear picture of what happened, he told his theory to Pakun and that they are going to head up river. Pakun said matter-of-factly, I don't need to tell you my nose isn't going to be a whole lot of good if Naruto never left the river, right Kakashi? Let's not think like that, Pakun, he responded, and then looked up at the approaching clouds. Besides, it's all we can do. In the end, once it rains, any traces of him will be lost. Both then proceeded east down the center of the river at full speed, trusting that the pug's nose will be able to pick up a trail despite how dark it was getting. A short time later, the nin dog came to a halt and began moving to the northern riverbank. Seeing Kakashi come up behind, Pakun stated, Naruto left the river here. Pulling out a glow rod, Kakashi cracked it and kneeled down inspecting the riverbank, but he saw no sign that anyone had been there. Looking at Pakun, who had moved onto dry land, he asked, Are you sure? Definitely, he responded. Also the teacher, Mizuki, was here, and both scents head in the direction of Kahona. Standing back up, Kakashi ordered, All right, lead the way. Following the scent trail, the pair arrived a short time later at a clearing where the nin dogs stopped and began moving around the area, picking up the different scents. Looking up, he said, They both passed through this area. But after Naruto reached here, he begins to head away from the village. Looking around with the glow stick, Kakashi still saw no sign that anybody had passed through the area. That fact bothered him greatly. Why was there no sign of Naruto passing through the area? Also, why after reaching this area did he begin to head away from Kahona? What was it he was not seeing? Suddenly he heard, Hey Kakashi, come here. Rousing from his thoughts, he made his way over to the small dog who was rifling through some bushes. What is it? He asked. There's a kunai in these bushes. The summons replied. I'm not surprised, this forest is probably filled with them, Kakashi stated. Yeah, but this one has Mizuki's scent, counters Pakun, as well as the smell of Naruto's blood. What? Kakashi exclaimed. Searching the bush, he carefully pulled out the kunai in question. Moving it under the glow rod, he examined it and let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. There wasn't enough blood on the kunai for it to have been a debilitating hit. Instead, only one side of the edge was coated. It probably only grazed him. Thinking aloud, Kakashi asked, What happened out here? I don't know, Pakun said, but whatever did go down. Naruto begins to head east away from the village and Mizuki continues to head toward it. Forget Mizuki for now. Looking up at the ominous clouds, Kakashi stated with growing concern, We have to keep after Naruto. Roger. Pakun then took off in the direction Naruto headed towards with Kakashi right behind him. Racing the impending rain, they make it to a road and then follow it to the north where Pakun stopped them at a trading outpost. Kakashi tells the dog to search inside while he questioned the guard, who looked to be on the verge of sleeping. Questioning the guard proved to be a waste of time. He was apparently as observant as he was diligent in his duties, that was to say he saw nothing. Seeing Pakun returning, he turned to the pug asking hopefully, Is he here? He was, Pakun replied, however I lost him back by where the merchants parked their wagons. Considering there is no scent of him leaving the outpost, he probably jumped into one of the wagons as it left, and before you ask, the only way I'll be able to pick up his scent again is if he gets off or he is close enough that the wind carries it to me. We'd have to pick the right road to follow, especially considering the turnover of this place. I doubt many of the merchants from this morning are still here. I could summon the rest of the pack to search each of the roa. However, Kakashi left the rest unsaid as he lost his race with nature as the heavens unleash its fury as it began to rain. Pakun, seeing Kakashi looking depressed, tried to cheer him up by pointing out that even if it hadn't started to rain, it still would have been a long shot. They would have had to search every wagon they came across since so many of them were carrying items that would have masked Naruto's scent among them. Also, the boy was still alive at least. Kakashi, recognizing what his summons was trying to do, gave a weak-eye smile to let Pakun know he appreciated it. Telling the dog he could return to his home, he watched as the dog disappeared into smoke. Alone in front of the outpost, a single thought passed through his head: I'm sorry, sensei. I couldn't protect your legacy. Standing there, he was abruptly overtaken by an incredible feeling of rage as his hands closed into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. It may only be backed by circumstantial evidence, but he knew Mizuki was behind Naruto's leaving the village. He would get to the bottom of it, and when he had enough proof, his vengeance on the Chunin would be swift and complete. But first, he would have to tell the Hokage that he had lost Naruto's trail. So turning back to the village, he sent a silent prayer that Kami would watch over his sensei's son. Naruto was currently sitting in the woods near a village called Pelican Bay. It was a small port town located in the Land of Water. Helping Akihiro unload his wagon after they arrived at Port City, the merchant had given Naruto a few ryo, claiming he did more work than he ate. Leaving the man's company, he had snuck onto the ship that the peaches were loaded onto, knowing that Akihiro had sold them to the ship's captain for a nice profit and that the ship was heading to the Land of Water. After sneaking off the ship upon its docking, Naruto had been surprised at what he saw. Apparently, this country was rather poor when compared with the Land of Fire. Also, everything appeared run down and there were lots of homeless orphans running around, which made it easy for him to blend in. Unfortunately, the townspeople did not take kindly to these children because in order to survive they often needed to resort to stealing. Naruto had tried to make friends with some of them, but they all had refused. Probably because having him around would be another mouth to feed, and considering they barely had enough for themselves, they kept their distance. After someone had tried to press him into joining his gang as a pickpocket, Naruto had moved to the forest surrounding the town. Several weeks had passed since he had left Konoha. He really missed the old man. He also often found himself thinking about Hinata and Sakura. He wondered if they thought about him and if they missed him. He was doing so now while sitting in some bushes. He had set up several traps to catch some food and was watching one of them now. He was just glad that he had read the books by Kumo Grills about how to survive in the wild. He had already made a shelter, and while crude, it kept him warm at night. He really wished that he had paid more attention in geography class. He didn't know how bad the winters got in the Land of Water, considering all he had on was a orange vest, blue shirt, and orange pants. It could get very dicey for him if the winters were served. His stomach growled to let its displeasure known at the lack of food in it. It had been about a day and a half since he had eaten anything really substantial. When he had first entered the woods, he had been able to catch very small animals to eat thanks to the traps he had set. However, apparently the animals knew to stay away from this area now. Luckily, there was still various foliage he could eat. But he was primarily a meat eater, well, technically a ramen eater, so that for him was a last resort. Naruto sat up a little straighter when he heard a twig snap. Looking around, he spotted a rabbit with white fur coming towards his snare trap. He briefly wondered at why this one was white when all the other ones he ate were brown, but since they probably tasted the same, he didn't really care. The rabbit, unaware that it was being watched by a pair of ravenous blue eyes, slowly made its way to the bait. As the rabbit edged closer and closer, Naruto's smile grew bigger. Also, he began to drool. Right before the rabbit would trigger the trap, it stopped and inspected the bait. However, as if it didn't trust the free meal, began to back off. Naruto, seeing dinner leaving, burst out of the bushes and screamed, "Get in my belly, rabbit!" Regrettably for him, in his zest to catch the rabbit, he took the shortest path, which was a straight line, but seeing as how that line took him right over his own trap, he was quickly propelled upwards into the trees upside down. Seeing the rabbit now make its way back towards the bait to eat, he told it, "I'll get you next time you varmint." Hearing a soft laugh, he looked in the direction it came from and saw a young person coming out of the same bushes the rabbit did. Naruto looked at the person, who was trying not to laugh too hard at his predicament, decided to ask, "Would you mind helping me down? All the blood rushing to my head is making me dizzy." The person moved to where the rope was tied off and after undoing the knot, slowly lowered him to the ground. Once on the ground, Naruto assumed a sitting position and said, "Thanks, if you hadn't come along I'd probably be there for days. My name's Naruto. It's nice to meet you, Naruto. I'm Haku. What were you doing up there?" "Trying to catch something," Naruto said while smiling. Giving a smile in return, Haku stated with some mirth, "Well, it appears you succeeded, although most people refrain from catching themselves." Naruto pouted a little at the joke at his expense while saying, "Yeah, my prey is clever, it lured me into my own trap." While talking to Haku, the rabbit made its way towards them. Naruto, seeing this, waited until it was close enough, then springs towards it. Haku, seeing Naruto's sudden movement, jumped back slightly, but seeing his target, quickly grabbed him by the wrist and told him, "Please don't attack Mr. Whiskers." Naruto, surprised at the strength in Haku's grip, stopped his charge. Once Haku saw Naruto stop, he let go of him. Naruto began to rub his wrist, saying, "You're really strong for a girl." Haku sighed at once again, being confused for a female. Set Naruto straight, "I'm a boy." "Really?" Haku nodded his head yes. Naruto put his hand behind his head while apologizing, "Sorry, it's just you're prettier than some girls I've seen." Haku smiled and said, "It's okay, you're not the first and I doubt you'll be the last." Naruto's stomach, upset at its plight being ignored, decided to make its presence known and growled loudly. Looking sheepish, Naruto asked, "Are you sure we can't eat the rabbit?" "Yes," Haku said quickly, but seeing Naruto's sad look suggested, "However, if you want, it is almost time for me to prepare dinner and I'm sure Zabuza wouldn't be too upset if I made a little extra for you." "Really?" Naruto asked, perking up at the idea of food. "You're the best, Haku." With that said, Haku scooped up Mr. Whiskers and they make their way back to his and Zabuza's camp. On the way, Haku thought, maybe Zabuza will let him stay with us? It would be nice to have a friend. Zabuza Momochi, demon of hidden mist, was sitting near a campfire waiting for his associate Haku to return. The boy had been playing with that stupid rabbit of his when it had run off. He still did not know why he allowed Haku to keep it. He figured maybe it would come in use one day, like he could use it for the substitution jutsu. Putting such thoughts aside, Zabuza thought about the future. He and Haku were heading to the town Pelican Bay. He had a contact there who would smuggle them onto a ship heading for Tea Country. It had gotten too dangerous to remain in the land of water. They had just narrowly avoided some hunter nin who had located their old hideout. Also, now that Haku was showing some real promise, it was time to start hiring out their services so he could begin building funds for his next attempt on the fourth Mizukage. Hearing footsteps, he instinctually grabbed his sword, the executioner's blade, especially due to the fact that if it was Haku, he wasn't alone. Haku came out of the brush first holding the rabbit, followed by a dirty blonde-haired boy wearing an awful lot of orange. Zabuza, addressing Haku, said, "If you keep bringing back strays every time you go off into the woods alone, I'm going to have to tie a leash around you." Haku at least had the decency to look abashed at his words, considering it was almost like how Haku had sprung the rabbit on him the first time. "I'm sorry, Zabuza, however I would like it if Naruto here could travel with us," Haku said calmly. The truth was, on the walk back to camp they had shared stories about themselves and he felt a kinship with his fellow outcast. "Tell him to get lost, Haku. I'm not running a babysitting service," Zabuza said sternly. "Please, Zabuza, I know he will be of use to you," a pleading Haku asked. Zabuza arches a figurative eyebrow at this. During the year they have been together, Haku would always accept his word as law, never once questioning it. Why was it so important to him this boy travel with them? "Come here, boy," Zabuza commanded. Naruto, who was hiding partially behind Haku, moved in front of the man holding a great big blade. While Haku led him to the camp, Naruto had told him the tale of how he had come to be in the forest. However, he had left out the part with the red chakra, afraid that whatever had made the adults of the Leaf Village so afraid of him was that, and if others knew about it, they would fear him too. Zabuza, looking down at the undersized boy, had very high doubts that he will be anywhere near as useful as Haku. His face clearly showed this, so Haku speaks up. "Go ahead, Naruto, tell him how you defeated the ninja who attacked your friends." "You took down a fully trained shinobi, I doubt that, shrimp," stated Zabuza, his voice full of mirth at the idea. "I did so," responded Naruto, angry at being called a liar. "He may have been focused on my friend at the time, so he never saw it coming, but I beat him, so there." "Tell me how it went down then," Zabuza said, still amused. Naruto then went into how the ninja came, threatening to take Hinata Hyuga, and how after making the ninja believe he had killed him, stabbed him in the back, with both of them falling into the river. While only a half-truth, since the only part he left out was the red chakra, neither Zabuza nor Haku were able to detect the deception. "Let's just say I believe your story. You're a long way from the Leaf. Why aren't you at home being celebrated as a hero then, boy?" asked Zabuza. Naruto told them about his teacher Mizuki's betrayal and also how most of the adults treated him as if he didn't exist for as long as he could remember. However, Zabuza remained unconvinced at Naruto's future usefulness, so deciding not to bring him with, he said, "You can stay and eat with us, but in the morning we're leaving and you are not coming with." "But Zabuza, Quiet Haku, he said, cutting off Haku's protest. The boy got lucky, that's all. You heard him, he was only in the Leafs Academy for 6 months. Whoever this ninja he killed was made the mistake of dropping his guard, and the pipsqueaker Simple capitalized on that. Haku Simple looked at Zabuza with disappointment, causing him to question his decision, considering losing Haku's trust would hurt his future plans. Suddenly a large shout of, "You can go to hell," caught their attention. Naruto had been sad at being told he couldn't travel with them. After all, Haku said his master was strong and he still wanted to learn how to be a shinobi. However, the way Zabuza spoke of him pissed him off, so after he shouted he went on saying, "Yeah, I got lucky against the bastard that attacked me and my friends, and I haven't been properly trained, but one day I'm going to be Hokage. I don't need you. I'll find a way to make my dream come true, believe it." Zabuza was impressed with the boy's spirit, and looking at him he saw the steel in the boy's eyes. But all he said was, "Hokage. Ha, don't make me laugh, kid, you've been run out of your village. You admit no one acknowledged you and you think you can become one of the most powerful shinobi in the ninja world." Naruto, undeterred Simple, continued to glare at Zabuza while countering, "I said it and I'm not going to back down. I'm going to get stronger, and then one day I'll go back to the village to kick Mizuki's ass. Just you watch, one day Naruto Uzumaki will be the Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves." Zabuza admired the kid's guts to stand up for himself against him. It's a quality that he had always admired in ninja, and this kid had it in spades. So he thought, perhaps this boy will be of some use after all. Aloud he said, "I imagine they taught you how to gather chakra at the academy?" Seeing the boy nod he continued, "Then I want you to gather as much chakra as you can." Naruto formed the hand sign and began to gather all his chakra. Zabuza's eyes widened as the boy began to glow with it as he quickly gathered enough chakra to put several chunin to shame. When the boy finally stopped, Zabuza looked at Haku and said, "You were right, he will prove to be very useful to me." Turning back to address Naruto he said, "I've changed my mind, boy, if you desire you can travel with us. However, I'll tell you the same thing I told Haku. I'm not looking for companionship, you are nothing but a weapon that I will forge, and once you have helped me to achieve my ambition you'll be free to leave to achieve your own, am I clear?" Naruto knew in order to become stronger he would need someone to teach him, but asked, "What do you want to do that you need my help?" "I want to kill the 4th Mizukage," Zabuza answered. "If you can help me to achieve that goal you'll be recognized as strong enough to be at the level of a Kage." Naruto thought it over for a minute but then stuck his hand out and said, "I'll do my best to be one of your weapons, Zabuza-sensei. Don't call me that, brat, just Zabuza is fine." Haku, having begun to make dinner after Zabuza changed his mind, informed them that it was ready. So the three of them gathered around the fire, each contemplating the role the others would play in each of their futures. Naruto about having a sensei who would help him achieve his goal of being Hokage, and a friend in Haku. Haku began to wonder if there was more to his existence than to simple being a weapon. Finally Zabuza, who after seeing Naruto's amazing chakra capacity at only 6 imagined himself one step closer to killing the bastard of a Mizukage and avenging his own sensei. The three ate in silence and then turned in, for at dawn they would sneak into the town for a ship to tea. Zabuza's last thought before closing his eyes for a light sleep was, "That boy is the key to fulfilling my dream. Well done, Haku. You found a true diamond in the rough in that one." Hinata was sitting in Iruka-sensei's class as he gave a lecture on the founding of the Leaf Village. She was sitting next to her best friend Sakura, which was the only bright spot that came from the kidnapping attempt on her a few weeks ago. While she had missed the rest of the week following the attempt, she had returned only to see Mizuki had been replaced. She had been glad for that, considering she blamed her old teacher for his role in what had happened. According to her father, Mizuki should have made sure all the children had been protected. She had even heard that he had been demoted to genin for his screw-up. She hoped it was true. Watching Iruka, she was sure that Naruto would have liked having him as a teacher. Thinking of the blonde brought the old familiar pain that it was her fault he wasn't here today. Sakura had continued to try to convince her it wasn't, something she was grateful to the pink-haired girl for, but she just couldn't help it. Also, as no new searches had been conducted for Naruto today, the pain had intensified due to her believing another life had been lost in exchange for hers. However, as the anguish of her thoughts began to overwhelm her to the point that she was about to break down and cry in the middle of class, a memory of Naruto came to her. It was from their first week at the academy for a preliminary test on their shuriken technique. Naruto had missed all 10 targets while Hinata had only missed 5. Naruto, determined to get better, had stayed after class, and probably all night, for Hinata had watched for hours before she had to go home, practicing. The next day, when the other kids came into class seeing a dirty Naruto wearing the same clothes, most of them had mocked him. Later that day they had gone outside to do the test again, however this time Naruto managed to hit 4 targets. The kids teased him again because while he improved he had still hit the lowest amount of targets in the class. While he was still sad at being teased, Hinata had saw something pass through his eyes, joy. He may have hit the fewest targets, but he had improved, and that is what mattered to him, so it was no surprise to her when after class he went right out onto the shuriken field to practice some more. As the memory faded, Hinata resolved that she would follow Naruto's example. She may be weak and worthless now, but she would dedicate the rest of her life to becoming stronger. Tuning back in, she heard Iruka speaking about the first Hokage. That's it, she thought, having a little epiphany, I'll become Hokage. That way she would be able to fulfill, in proxy, the dream of the boy she so admired, and also with the power of the Hokage's office she would be able to stop the caged bird seal from being used by the Hyuga main house, thereby ensuring her uncle didn't die for nothing and hopefully erasing the growing hatred between the two houses. Her course set, Hinata began listening to the lecture in earnest. After all, the Hokage had to be a master in all fields, even history. As the sun set on another day, the third Hokage sat at his desk and he was presently looking at the file of the ninja who had attempted to kidnap Hinata, the missing nin Hajime Moi. While he could not prove it, he believed that this attempt had been sponsored by the Raikage despite Moi's status as a missing nin. He would of course send a strongly worded message about making sure he kept his eyes off the Hyuga, but in the interest of ensuring the peace that would be as far as it went. Sometimes in his weaker moments he wished Danzo would have been chosen to be Hokage instead of him. However, he knew the path that the village would have been led down would have ensured its destruction, so he always quickly reined in such thoughts. As he closed the file he sighed in frustration. For all the power he possessed, he continuously found himself compromising onto many fronts. Naruto unfortunately being the most pressing of them. All of the boy's life the Hokage had been trying to balance what was best for Naruto against what was best for the village. However, as recent events could attest, Naruto had too often been the one getting the short end of the stick. Despite knowing that he was still alive due to Kakashi's report, no massive hunt would be undertaken. Sarutobi could not risk that the other hidden villages would guess as to Naruto's importance, thus would try to locate him themselves to use as a weapon. Also, if word of Naruto's survival spread, it may prompt Danzo to capture him for his own ends. No, it was probably best for both the village and Naruto if only he and a few trusted people knew the truth. So the search for him would be handled like any other case of a missing child, a few flyers spread throughout the land with his description, and that would be it. A choice that may have cost him the respect of one of his most trusted Anbu. Upon hearing his decision, Kakashi had almost quit right there to go looking for him on his own. Only the assurance that he would be allowed to discreetly look for leads had kept him in the village. Kami only knows how Jiraiya would respond when word reached him. Perhaps he should have allowed Jiraiya to take the child with him on his travels. Even though Naruto may have turned out to be a raging pervert, he at least would have been showed the affection he deserved. However, the need for Jiraiya's spy network had been depressing, and thus once again the needs of Kohona trumped those of Naruto. Lastly, there was the Mizuki matter, another area where he and Kakashi had butted heads lately. While he agreed with Kakashi's theory that Mizuki was responsible for Naruto's running away, the lack of direct evidence would not allow him to take action. Kakashi had been adamant about trying to force the confession out of him by turning him over to one of the rising stars in the torture and interrogation department, who was said to be able to crack a person through mind games alone. But without the evidence to substantiate such a measure, even if Ibiki could make him sing like a canary, once the case went to trial the confession would be thrown out. Sarutobi decided to confront Mizuki to try and get him to slip up. So with Kakashi in the background silently intimidating him, Sarutobi had questioned him. However, the Chunin hadn't even batted an eye and had even admitted to handling the kunai with Naruto's blood, but had disregarded its importance to the search. When Kakashi asked why his was the only scent on it besides Naruto's, Mizuki hadn't even hesitated when he responded that perhaps Naruto had cut himself on it. After all, the boy was quite clumsy at times. So with their strongest piece of evidence not even being able to link Mizuki to Naruto directly, he was forced to let him leave. But not before he told Mizuki his final ruling on his suspension. Not only would he be permanently removed from the academy as an instructor, but he was being demoted to genin. At this, Mizuki had tried to argue, but he had simply stated to the former chunin that apparently his decision-making abilities have been compromised, leading him to no longer be able to perform his duties to the standards that the rank demanded. Dismissing them both, with little doubt that Kakashi was going to make Mizuki's life a living hell, Sarutobi began to finish his paperwork. Awoken from his thoughts by his secretary poking her head in to tell him she was going home for the night, she also told him he should do the same considering the number of late nights that he had been putting in lately. With a promise that he would leave soon, he wished her a good night and finished the last file. Getting up and hearing his joints protest from sitting at his desk too long, he headed off to another person he felt the need to apologize to. Meanwhile, in a hidden underground chamber at the compound owned by an elder of Kahona who went by the name Danzo, a man with no name knelt before his master. "Report," demanded the crippled elder. "The last of the Hokage's search parties looking for the Jinchuriki has reported in. They have found no sign of it," responded the man in an emotionless voice. "What of Kakashi? Has he been a part of any of the search parties since after the day of the incident?" Danzo asked. "No, sir. However, with the Inuzuka being cured of their poison, there was no need for him to continue, not to mention the storm." "True, however, the Jinchuriki has always had a soft spot in Sarutobi's heart. The idea that he would just give up on him implies something," Danzo mused. The man, knowing his master was not addressing him, remained quiet. Danzo sat there and thinks, analyzing what he knew of his philosophical rival until he came to one solution and course of action. "Send out several of my best trackers to look for the Jinchuriki. Tell them to take as long as needed to track it down and capture it," Danzo ordered. He had come to the conclusion that Sarutobi knew the boy was alive, and to prevent Danzo from learning of this, the Hokage is trying to play it that the boy drowned when in fact he ran away. A perfect opportunity to abduct the Jinchuriki and turn it into the weapon it should have already been. The man, knowing he has been dismissed despite not really understanding why his master would tie up his best trackers looking for a boy that probably drowned, left to fulfill his orders. Sarutobi, having left the tower, made his way to a safe house near the Yamanaka flower shop. He had set it up 6.5 years previously. Walking inside, he bypassed the seals on the door restricting access to him and only a few of his most trusted associates and Anbu. Walking inside, he acknowledged the salutes from the Anbu on guard and made his way to the master bedroom, passing the nurse on duty. There in the master bedroom, lying in the bed, is a woman with red hair. She had been laying here for 6.5 years, ever since the Kyuubi attack to be exact. After the stress of having given birth and then receiving news about the death of her husband, her psyche snapped. She then attempted to kill her own child, believing him to be the creature he contained. He and the others such as Jiraiya had attempted to calm her, but the only thing that had a lasting effect was a genjutsu, in which a wife never lost a husband and a child had not had a burden of such magnitude placed on him, and the three of them were able to live happily together. They have tried to wake her a few times from the illusionary world, however her consciousness clings to it with all the desperation of a drowning man holding onto a life preserve. Consequently, the woman laid here a prisoner of her own mind, preferring it to the reality she would otherwise have to face. Although Sarutobi knew that if she was well, she would have expected him to watch over her son far better than he had. So bowing slightly to the sleeping woman, he said, "I'm sorry, Kushina." Over 9 months had passed since Naruto had joined up with Zabuza and Haku. The three of them were currently holed up in Tea Country. Zabuza lately had been having second thoughts about Naruto's usefulness. The reason for this was due to the jutsu that Naruto was currently practicing. "Clone jutsu," Naruto cried out. However, instead of the perfect replica that he was hoping for, a sickly-looking version of him was laying on the ground. Zabuza sighed while saying, "Do it again." Internally he thought, how did Heishiro-sensei deal with setbacks such as this? In the end it didn't matter, Zabuza was not the teacher that his sensei was. Also, he did not have any more time to waste on trying to train a defective weapon. Making his decision, he called out, "Naruto, come here." Naruto, who was looking at his latest failure with the clone jutsu, began walking towards Zabuza. He had grown a little in the past few months, and had been forced by Zabuza to forsake the color orange, for a gray and black version of the vest and pants he had on when they found him. He was also happier than he had ever been, while Zabuza was harsh to train for he had acknowledged him, which is why when Zabuza told him, "I can no longer use you," his world had been crushed. "But why?" asked a stunned Naruto. "I'm not going to waste more time training someone who apparently has no talent to be a ninja," Zabuza said bluntly. "If this is about the clone jutsu," Naruto began, only to be cut off by Zabuza. "It's not just your inability to make a functioning clone but your lack in all the basics jutsus have taught you." Haku, taking Naruto's side, said, "Naruto has mastered the henge jutsu and even created that variation of it." Rubbing his hand over his forehead, frustrated at once more being double-teamed by the boys, which was another reason he sometimes regretted taking Naruto with them, was that Haku would often come to the younger boy's defense whenever he felt Zabuza was being too hard on him. Zabuza wasn't about to be swayed this time though. "That jutsu is useless, it would only work against a raging pervert, Haku." "Hey, it is not useless, and besides, what about my taijutsu? You said I've really improved at it," Naruto added. "Yeah, you have, but only a fool would be willing to enter a fight with a real shinobi without ninjutsu or genjutsu to back it up," Zabuza countered. In Konoha, a young boy with a magnificent pair of eyebrows sneezed. Unfortunately, he did so in the face of the young girl he was about to ask out. Needless to say, she said no. Also, only a bigger fool would be willing to let you live with the idea that you could get by with only taijutsu. Back in Konoha, a man with even larger eyebrows sneezed, causing him to lose a staring contest with his rival. Therefore, giving the edge in number of wins to his opponent and forcing him to obey his self-imposed rule of doing 1,000 laps around Konoha with a boulder on his back. "Please Zabuza, give me another chance," Naruto begged, "I'll get it this time." With that being said, Naruto forms the hand sign for the clone jutsu. Stopping him, Zabuza said, "If you haven't got it by now, one last desperate attempt won't change anything." "Then how about a different one?" Naruto asked. "You said that there are different kinds of clone jutsu." "There are, but the one you can't do is the basis for all of them, which is why you start with it," Zabuza said. However, seeing both Naruto's begging face and Haku's look of disappointment, he relents slightly. "Fine," he said while digging in his pack. Pulling out a worn scroll, he threw it at Naruto and said, "You have 6 hours to learn the water clone jutsu on this scroll. If you do it, I'll continue to train you. However, if you fail, then you travel with us as far as the next town and then you get lost, understood?" Zabuza then explained the basics of the jutsu to him and told him to head down to the nearby stream. Looking at Haku, who was a little happier that he gave Naruto another chance, but he warned Haku, "Don't get your hopes up. His inability to do the basic clone jutsu guarantees he isn't going to get that one." Haku smiled as he said, "I think he'll surprise you." With nothing left to be said, he returned to his hideout and practice. Shaking his head at Haku's optimism, Zabuza walked over to a log and sat down. Whoever heard of someone being able to pull off the more advanced version of a technique while bombing the easier one? Naruto, after receiving the scroll, headed down to the stream, and when he was out of sight, he stuck his tongue out at Zabuza, thinking, "Stupid Zabuza. I'll show him. I'll have this jutsu mastered in half the time." Reaching the stream, he sat down and began reading the instruction written in the scroll. The past few months for Hinata had been especially trying. First, her mother had died while giving birth to her sister Hanabi. This led into the second difficulty, which was her father, why always rather hard on her during training, became even more so. However, she wouldn't allow it to bring her down and instead used it to help build herself up. Even her father, who never actually came out and said it, had to admit her Jukin form had improved considerably. These problems, though, were not what she was currently fixating on as she made her way to class. With the start of the new school year, she and Sakura had not been assigned to the same class except for the kunoichi classes all girls attended. She had asked Iruka sensei why once after passing him in the hall. He had explained that as the years went on they may be assigned to the same class again. However, the goal of the academy was to weed out those who did not have the necessary skills to be shinobi. Also, it was to see which groups of potential genin worked well together, therefore they needed to try different class makeups. These two things working in conjunction would determine the students who were put into her class until there were only 27 remaining potential genin in her final year ready to graduate. Before this year, her and Sakura would play together and practice the lessons that Iruka sensei had assigned. Both girls had been serious about becoming proud kunoichi of the leaf. However, as of late, Sakura seemed to just go through the motions. Also, Sakura had told her that she and Ino were no longer friends due to their sharing a crush on Sasuke Uchiha. Sakura had then asked her if she had one on him too. But Hinata assured her that she didn't. After all, the boy she would have admitted to having one on was presumed dead. Besides, Hinata couldn't really understand what the big deal about Sasuke was, while good-looking and happy enough. Considering the few times she saw him in the company of his older brother, he was no Naruto. Seeing her friend also walking to the academy, Hinata called out, "Hey Sakura." Sakura, hearing her name, turned to see Hinata waving as she quickly made her way towards her. Smiling, she said, "Good morning, Hinata." "Good morning," Hinata replied as they began walking side by side to school. "Are you ready for Namida-sensei's flower arranging contest?" Hinata asked. "Yeah, but we all know Ino Pig is going to win it," Sakura answered with another snide comment at her former friend's expense. Hinata over the last few months had slowly lost her stutter as her confidence grew. Not to say that certain situations wouldn't bring it back out, primarily when her father would rebuke her for sloppiness in her gentle fist form. However, between her and Sakura it had long since disappeared. Therefore, Sakura wasn't too surprised to hear the mild rebuke as Hinata told her, "You shouldn't speak about Ino like that. Maybe if you stopped, then she would stop picking on your forehead." This wasn't the first time that Hinata had tried to play peacemaker between Sakura and Ino. Sakura was a little sick of it though. Hinata just didn't understand what a woman in love had to do to ensure her happily ever after. So stopping to turn toward her friend, she said, "I wouldn't expect you to understand, Hinata. After all, you're still pining after Naruto, even if the village is better off without age." Slap. Sakura is surprised that all of the sudden she was no longer looking at Hinata, that is until her cheek began to sting with the pain of the slap. Looking at Hinata, her eyes widened in shock at the angry look that adorned the usually mellow girl's face. Running over what she could have said to upset Hinata so, she cursed herself for letting slip what her mom would tell her every time she had brought up Naruto since he had gone missing. She wanted to apologize because the truth was she still wasn't sure what to think of him. However, noticing most of the adults' happiness at Naruto's disappearance, not to mention her own mother's, had an effect on her way of thinking. She was about to say she was wrong till the little voice that had been getting stronger as a result of Sakura hiding her true feelings in order to fit in with the other girls after Sasuke screamed, "Cha, who does this bitch think she is?" She is about to give voice to that opinion when Hinata cuts her off. "I can't believe you would say such a thing, Sakura. We're only still here because of Naruto," Hinata said, tears beginning to form at the corner of eyes. Sakura thought, she's right, but angry at being slapped, she said, "Face it, Hinata, everyone agrees with me. I know you've noticed how the adults have been acting happier since he's been gone." Actually shaking with rage at Sakura's words and afraid if she remains in her presence she will do something that will reflect poorly on the Hyuga, she yelled, "You're an ungrateful bitch, Sakura Haruno, and I never want to speak to you again." Turning on her heel, she resumed her walk to school. Sakura was shocked that not only did the soft-spoken Hinata raise her voice to her, but also cussed at her. After watching Hinata disappear around the corner, it finally sinked in that she has just driven away her only remaining friend. Tears forming in her own eyes, she whispered weakly, "I'm sorry." She then began her own walk to school with her head down, feeling far emptier than she was just a few minutes ago. Zabuza had waited the 6 hours as promised and then went in search of Naruto. He found the little idiot asleep on the bank of the stream. Irritated at the sleeping boy that after having been given a second chance he actually had the audacity to sleep instead of training like his future depended on it. Zabuza picked up Naruto and threw him into the water. "Gah, what the hell did you that for?" screamed Naruto as his head breaks the surface. "This is what you do with the generous second chance I've given you, sleep it away?" Zabuza questioned angrily. Making his way to shore, he said triumphantly, "What are you talking about? I had that jutsu nailed after the first hour." "Talk is cheap, prove it," Zabuza demanded. "Right," Naruto said while forming the hand seals, then called out, "Water clone jutsu." Out on the stream a replica of Naruto formed, but instead of the sickly ones Zabuza had gotten used to seeing, this one looked perfect. Of course, that is till it fully formed and fell into the river due to the fact that Naruto hadn't learned water walking yet. The clone made its way to shore grumbling about almost drowning until Naruto points out that it was made of water, therefore couldn't this sets off an argument between the two, which then degenerated into a fist fight. Zabuza ignored the pair, too stunned at what he has just witnessed. The boy couldn't do the simple bunshin but could easily pull off a harder variation. Haku, hearing all the ruckus, made his way down to the stream, and upon seeing the brawling Naruto smiled, saying, "I knew you could do it, Naruto." Laughing lightly at the pair of, "Believe it," he got in response. Still trying to figure out how Naruto pulled it off, he gives up and decided to have Naruto walk him through what he did to perform the jutsu. Naruto began after dispelling his clone. Well, the scroll said that the jutsu required more chakra than the regular bunshin. But I really wasn't sure how much that was, so I started with the amount I was putting into the regular clone jutsu, and once I got the hand signs right, everything worked just fine. "Wait," Zabuza said, "you were putting that much chakra into the regular bunshin jutsu. You idiot, I told you only needed a small amount to make it work." Naruto countered, "I can't get my chakra any smaller." "Can't get it any smaller?" Zabuza thought, surprised. "Just how much chakra does he have?" Aloud he said, "Naruto, I want you to make as many water clones as you can." Naruto smiled at this after making the last sign and calling out the jutsu. Both Haku and Zabuza eyes widened at the sight that unfolded before them. There are so many water clones of Naruto that the stream runs dry until more water showed up to fill in the amount missing. In unison they say, "Not bad, huh?" Zabuza simply began laughing. While it's true that water clones were more limited, needing a water supply and only able to move a certain distance from the one whom cast the jutsu, if he could get this boy to learn, say, the shadow clone jutsu, well, Zabuza would practically have a one-man army on his side. Kami surely had smiled on him when Haku had found the boy, that was for damn sure. Hinata was walking home after school, still upset with what Sakura had said that morning. Although, she was wondering if she should apologize for slapping Sakura. While Hinata had meant what she said, it didn't give her the right to hit her. To be honest, her desire to apologize stemmed from the fact that she missed her friend's company and it had only been one day. Even though they didn't share the same regular class, they would meet up at lunch to eat or pair up during certain kunoichi lessons that required a partner. During lunch she had eaten alone and saw Sakura doing the same. Hinata had also noticed that when Sakura thought she wasn't looking, she would glance over with a sad look on her face. Hinata had almost gone over to talk to her then. However, remembering Sakura's words, she decided that she wouldn't talk to her until Sakura took back what she said about Naruto. So there she was, heading to the Hyuga compound for her afternoon training with her father, when an article of clothing in a store window caught her eye. It was a jacket with a hood with some white fur trimmed around the base of it. However, what she absolutely adored about it was the color. It was the same orange that Naruto used to wear. Deciding that she had to have it, she went in and bought the merchant's entire stock in her size. Leaving a very happy merchant, considering he had bought jackets that color on a lark, never expecting a lone Hyuga would clean out most of his stock on the first day. Hinata for her part felt a little better. Also, she was glad that she had saved up her allowance and decided she would start wearing her new clothes tomorrow. Walking home with what she could carry, with the rest being delivered later. She decided that until Sakura apologizes, that the two of them could no longer be friends. After all, just because the rest of the village decided that Naruto's disappearance was good news, the two of them owed him too much to ever think like that. Hinata, walking faster, so she wouldn't be too late to practice, smiled about her finding another way to emulate Naruto. Zabuza was walking back to their campsite after striking out finding work at the local meeting place, aka the bar. He was lost in thought at what he had found. Looking at the missing child flyer in his hand, which contained the picture of one Naruto Uzumaki, apparently he wasn't as despised as he believed. However, this posed a problem for Zabuza, especially after the display this morning. Before, had he found this, he would have simply contacted the office for missing children listed and collected any reward they had offered. But now, understanding what was holding Naruto back, he knew the kid had the potential to even surpass Haku. He could just not tell him, but if it ever came to light that Zabuza knew Kahona was looking for him, he would lose whatever trust he had built with the boy. On the flip side, if Zabuza did tell Naruto and he decided to go back to his village, he was in the same boat. Nearing camp, he made up his mind to put such decisions off till later. However, if he hadn't been so distracted by his moral dilemma, he would have noticed that he had picked up a tail ever since leaving the bar. The Kiri hunter Nin had not believed her luck when Zabuza walked past her in the bar, especially considering that he was the most wanted man in all of the Land of Water. He even rated higher than one Kisame Hoshigaki, something most in her profession couldn't understand. Yes, Zabuza had attempted a coup d'état but he had failed. Also his bingo book rating was only A rank. Kisame on the other hand, had killed an important feudal lord and was S-ranked. Surely he was the bigger threat. Despite this, almost no resource were sent after Kisame while the Hunter division spent everything on the manhunt for Zabuza. However, such thoughts were for later. The only reason the Hunter hadn't attacked him right away was most of her jutsus were water-based, and she would need a good water supply for when she attacked. So she would follow the target until the opportune moment. When Zabuza made it to camp, he didn't see either of the boys. Figuring they were down by the stream, he made his way toward it. Seeing that Naruto was watching Haku practicing his Kekkei Genkai, he made his presence known. Getting up, Naruto made his way to Zabuza to see if they had any work. Just as he is about to reach him, Zabuza tackled him to the ground as two kunai bury themselves where Naruto would have been. Zabuza quickly rolled into a crouching position using the flat of his sword as a shield, keeping it between them and the tree where the kunai knives had came from. Zabuza angrily called out, "You must be a big man to pick a kid as your first target." Dropping from the trees is a hunter nin wearing a white mask that has red marking as well as the Kiri symbol etched into the forehead. The hunter nin said in a bland voice, "I'm not so foolish as to believe that these children you've surrounded yourself with are anything but trained weapons. So a Kiri hunter nin has finally caught up to me, huh?" Zabuza said with a smirk. "The hunter division must be slipping, since I haven't seen any sign of you guys in over a year." "Oh, were you in a hurry to die, demon of mist?" countered the hunter. "You're the one who's going down," screamed Naruto right into Zabuza's ear. "Ah, shut up you idiot," Zabuza said, bonking Naruto in the head with the hand not bracing the sword up. Looking over at Haku, he gave him a hand sign to stay hidden behind the tree he had been using for cover. "It appears your tool does not know when to be quiet," the hunter commented after witnessing their interaction. "You're the tool lady," Naruto countered. However, Zabuza simply replied, "He's a work in progress." Grabbing Naruto around the midriff, he jumped back to where Haku was hiding. "You two stay out of this, understood?" he ordered. Walking back towards the hunter nin with his blade on his shoulder, he asked, "You got a name?" "None you would know, traitor." "Well, I guess you'll just have to die nameless," Zabuza said. With that said, he launched himself at the hunter nin, who responded with a hail of kunai. Zabuza swayed them out of the air, closing the distance. He then cuts the hunter in half, only for the two pieces that hit the floor to turn into a split log. From one of the trees on his left, a dozen shuriken fly at him. Unable to deflect them all, he was forced to retreat towards the stream. Landing on the water, he made the necessary hand signs and said, "Water style, water vortex jutsu." In front of him, a spinning funnel of water shoots out to hit the tree. The shurikens came from blowing all the leaves off of it. When the jutsu ended, the body of the hunter nin, which was pinned to the trunk by the technique, began to fall to the forest floor. It hits with a splash, looking like a giant raindrop. "Shit, water clone," thought Zabuza. He began scanning the battlefield for any sign of his opponent. "She's a mid to long range type fighter apparently. I need to get her out into the open." Calling her out, he said, "What's the matter? They didn't teach you how to fight up close and personnel in the hunter division?" "I am quite aware that the sword you carry is not just for show, traitor," the hunter countered. The hunter's voice seemed to be coming from everywhere, preventing Zabuza from pinpointing her location. Out of the water, 4 water drills raise up around a surprised Zabuza, piercing his front and back as well as his sides. "Zabuza!" screamed Naruto. He broke free of Haku's grip, running from the tree. A kunai shot out from where the hunter nin had been hiding. Naruto saw it and tried to reverse direction, falling on his rear. However, the hunter nin seemed to have expected this, as the kunai is in line with embedding itself in his head. Closing his eyes, he missed a thin wall of ice forming in front of him. Thunk was the noise it made as it buried itself into the ice. Naruto opened his eyes, surprised. Dying didn't hurt, only to see the kunai poking through the ice. The ice wall Haku made wasn't very strong, still having a great deal to learn about his bloodline, but it did the job. Naruto, looking at the blade only a foot away from having ended his life, thought, "If it wasn't for Haku, I'd be dead." Shaken by this revelation, he sat there not moving. Haku ran over to Naruto, hauling him to his feet while saying, "Come on." Running to another tree opposite from where the kunai was launched from, Haku and Naruto crouched down together, with Haku's arms wrapped around the younger boy protectively. Naruto, coming out of his shock, said, "Thanks Haku, but Zabuza." "It's okay Naruto, look at the stream." Haku replied calmly. Naruto did so in time to see Zabuza's floating body dissolve into water. A water clone. The hunter thought, when did he make it? Of course, when I lost sight of him behind the water vortex. Warning bells go off in her head. She quickly vacated the branch she was standing on. Zabuza, dropping from above, swung his sword downward through the spot an instant later, cutting through the branch the hunter had been on. Both land on the forest floor, with the hunter Nin's back to the water. Moving his sword so that it was resting along his shoulder. "Looks like you're not going to be able to hide while firing off jutsu anymore, and we both know you can't match me in a straight-up fight," Zabuza said, gloating. "It seems I overestimated my ability to bring you to justice, traitor. But we have your trail now, it is only a matter of time," the hunter said. "Only if you're alive to report to your superiors," Zabuza rebuked. The hunter Nin quickly spun on her heel and dashed away over the stream with Zabuza in pursuit. Halfway across, though, a copy of the hunter, which she made before the fight to lay in ambush, sprung out of the water. Zabuza, acting quickly, cuts it in half along the midsection. But the hunter Nin, having re-engaged after the distraction, used the spilling water from the clone to trap him in the water prison jutsu. The hunter Nin was about to gloat when Zabuza turned into the split log she had used earlier for a substitution, only with several exploding tags affixed to it. Disengaging the jutsu, she tried to clear the blast radius and succeeded partly. However, the force of the blast lifted her and deposited her on the opposite side of the stream. Trying to force herself up, she is pinned to the earth by the executioner's blade as Zabuza stabbed her in the back. Removing the blade, Zabuza picked up her corpse and carried it across the stream and laid it down near the two boys. Kneeling down, he pulled off the mask to see the glassy eyes of a young woman staring back at him. He began checking her person. Finding a bingo book, he took it to review later. He may find useful information about what the Hunter Division knows about his whereabouts. Also, he took the kunai and scrolls from her pouch. After all, it wasn't like there are an abundance of ninja stores outside of the shinobi villages, and the ones that do exist are almost sure to have people watching them to see who frequents them. Haku stepped up with Naruto behind him. Haku, looking sad, asked, "Did you have to kill her?" "It was either her or me," Zabuza answered without emotion, "and if she managed to kill me instead, you too would have followed." Naruto, in a weak voice, asked, "But couldn't you have just knocked her out and left her tied up?" "For what purpose?" Zabuza explained. "She would have eventually escaped and tried to hunt us down again. Also, she would have made sure to have brought backup as well." Looking both boys in the eyes, he continued, "This is the world we live in. It is cold and unforgiving, and the price of failure is almost always death." Haku nodded. He would have preferred to find a different way, especially due to the guilt he still felt at killing his father. But that hunter Nin hadn't hesitated in trying to kill Naruto. If in order to protect his precious people he would have to harden his heart, then he would. Kneeling down and picking up the hunter's mask, he looked at it while thinking he may not be able to simply shut off his emotions, but he would take this mask as a symbol. For whenever he put it on, he would behave as a shinobi should. Naruto, though, was filled with doubts. He would have died today had Haku not been there. Was this what his life would be, simple killing until he himself was killed? No, he wouldn't accept that. Just because the shinobi world was screwed up didn't mean they couldn't try to make it better. He may not have the answers now, but he would find them eventually. Also, he wondered if this was why Zabuza had threatened to abandon him. Did he see him as more than just some weapon? Was Zabuza concerned that if he didn't get stronger he would die? Zabuza liked to claim that he and Haku were nothing but weapons he was forging for his own ends. However, when Zabuza had called out to the hunter Nin after she had threw those kunai at him, his voice had been filled with anger. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed as Zabuza simply rolled the corpse into the stream. He asked, "What are you doing?" She may have sent a message to her superiors or other hunter Nin about our location before attacking, and if so, then there may be some way of locating her that I may have missed while searching her belongings. This way, if there is, the stream will carry her body away from us and will throw off pursuit, Zabuza answered. It just doesn't seem right, Naruto said, watching the body float away. Get used to it, Zabuza told him while making his way back to camp. If it was the other way around, me and Haku would probably be ash and your body would be taken back to Kiri to be dissected. Haku, seeing Naruto's confusion at that statement, answered the unasked question. They would have disposed of me and Zabuza to hide the secrets our bodies contain, Naruto. But why dissect me? Naruto inquired. To discover the potential secrets your body contains. Haku replied, missing the small grimace Naruto had at that statement. If they dissected him, would they discover the secret of the red chakra? Was it some sort of Kekkei Genkai? Whatever it was, he still feared it, although not nearly as much as Haku and Zabuza learning about it and treating him like the villagers of the leaf. Haku, beginning to follow Zabuza back to camp, asked, should we get ready to leave, Zabuza? Looking at the setting sun, Zabuza replied, we'll leave in the morning. If she had help nearby, she never would have attacked by herself. In the morning, Zabuza found Haku making breakfast. Naruto's belongings are packed and ready to go, but there is no sign of the boy. Where's Naruto? He asked. He went down by the stream to think. Haku responded, looking up from the food he is preparing. I believe he is still upset about what happened yesterday. Leaving camp, Zabuza walked to the place where the fight happened and finds Naruto sitting with his knees curled up into his chest and his arms wrapped around them, looking at the moving water. Hey, get back to camp for breakfast, it's almost ready, Zabuza said, but received no response. Annoyed at being ignored and deciding that if he wouldn't respond to the gentle way that he had harsher ways of getting his attention, said, did you hear me? I said. Was the reason you threatened to leave me behind because you were worried about me? Naruto asked. The question had bothered him all night. Would he wake up one day only to find out Zabuza didn't need him and would be discarded like an old kunai? Or, was the reason Zabuza wanted to be sure that Naruto was going to be able to take care of himself if he wasn't around? I told you, you're a weapon that I will use, Zabuza responding as coldly as he can. If a weapon is not capable of meeting its wielder's expectations, then it is discarded, and you need to come to terms with that. For that is the truth for all shinobi. We, reused by our villages or employers, and when it is expedient for them, they'll discard us for something of greater value. Reaching into a pocket for the flyer he found yesterday, he held it out to Naruto, telling him to take it. What's this? Naruto asked. It appears that the old man you keep talking about is looking for you, Zabuza answered. If you find that this life is not for you, then you should go back. It should be easy enough to get in touch with someone that will not alert that bastard of a teacher you had, so you can return to the village and your friends will be safe. Also, I don't need a weapon that is going to get all emotional every time there is a oomph. Zabuza tried to continue, only for Naruto to spring to his feet and hug him around the waist. Confused and trying to pry the surprisingly strong boy off of him, he said, what the hell do you think you're doing? Naruto, not letting go, answered, smiling, you're a big softy at heart. You try to sound all gruff and mean, but if you meant everything about me just being your weapon, you'd never have given me the means to go home. Being called soft by the knucklehead around his waist gave Zabuza the strength to pry the boy loose, and lifting him over his head threw him into the water, only for the boy to remerge seconds later, attempting to resume the hug. Zabuza responded to this by cutting him in half right down the middle with his sword. Hey, shouted Naruto, emerging a few feet from where he went into the water as the clone that was just killed by Zabuza dissolved. How did you know that wasn't me? Zabuza said while smirking beneath his wraps, I didn't. Naruto smiled at the obvious lie. Forming over 100 water clones, he said to them, alright guys, it's time for operation. Somebody needs a hug. Haku, having arrived to inform them that breakfast was ready, watched as Zabuza prepared himself for the onslaught, and he grinned at the display. As water clones met their maker, Haku wondered what his life would have been like if he had never met Naruto. There was no doubt the blonde boy added something to their group. A zest for life, he figured. After all, before Naruto he had simply been content to be needed. Now he wasn't so sure, especially considering that Naruto, who was the same as him, would never give up on his own dreams. While he had promised to help Zabuza achieve his ambition, he also still planned to return to Konoha and become Hokage. Yet Haku had no dreams of his own. Was he even truly alive if he had no ambition for the future? Seeing Zabuza dispose of the last clone and that the real Naruto was trapped under Zabuza's foot face down in the dirt, Haku informed them that breakfast was ready. Watching as Naruto, having been led up by Zabuza, appeared to be happy, despite being wet and muddy, came to decide that while he may not have his own dreams for the moment, he would dedicate everything he had to helping his two precious people achieve theirs. And, who knows, perhaps in the process discover one for himself. Sakura was sitting by herself at lunch again, feeling completely miserable. It had taken all her willpower not to cry several times yesterday after the argument with Hinata. When she finally made it home, she allowed herself to let go as she ran upstairs to her room. Her mother, having heard her, came to see what was wrong. Sakura explained what happened and her mother assured her that she wasn't the one at fault. What she had said after all was true. The village was better off without Naruto, and besides, Hinata didn't have the right to strike her over her opinion anyway. After convincing her mother not to tell Hinata's father, she had asked to be left alone. The truth was, despite what her mother said, she still felt as if it was her fault. Also, she did miss having the blonde boy around. While they only really interacted on the day that the attack took place, she had secretly enjoyed some of the pranks she had witnessed and missed his happy-go-lucky attitude. She then decided she would apologize to Hinata the next day at school. However, that proved to be harder than expected. Hinata had not taken her normal route to the academy that morning. With no classes together until her kunoichi class, which was after lunch, she had to wait until it was time to eat. Once her class had been dismissed for lunch, she rushed outside. Since Hinata's class was closer to the courtyard, she was usually there before her. Although when she got to the spot they used to eat it together, this was under the tree with the swing that Naruto used to eat, Hinata was nowhere to be found. Sad that Hinata was apparently avoiding her and not feeling right eating at their spot alone, she moved back to where she ate yesterday. Looking around the courtyard, Sakura couldn't help but feel that being a young kunoichi in love was a lonely life. Except for the bully Amy, who somehow still retained her two flunkies despite the fact that they also had crushes on Sasuke, all the other girls were sitting alone. Most of the boys had broken off into groups. There were some here or there who ate alone, like the weird Aburame kid, although she expected that it was by choice since he seemed to eat quickly then spend the rest of lunch searching for bugs. To think just 2 days ago she used to think the fact that she still had a female friend put her above some of these other girls. However, upon reflection she supposed that may also have been due to the fact that Hinata did not share feelings for Sasuke. With 15 minutes before lunch ended, Sakura noticed Hinata making her way to where they used to sit. She was holding a bag from Ichiraku, having gone there for lunch. Sakura was surprised to see that Hinata was wearing a new jacket, which, while in the same fashion as her white one, was orange. Also, she was wearing her usual black pants and she presumed shirt, which was covered by the jacket. Sakura almost wimped out but decided to go through with her apology. Had she known how it would have turned out, she would have stayed put. Amy Fu, the academy bully, was having lunch with her usual lackeys Kasumi and Fuki. It wasn't that she liked either of them, but they feared being on her bad side, so that made them tolerable. To describe her, she was pretty plain looking, her most outstanding feature being her purple hair. She keeps short except for a bang on the left side of her face that was longer than the rest. Her brown eyes narrowed with malice as she watched Sakura get up to make her way to Hinata. Sakura had been her favorite target to pick on before that pig Ino had stepped in. She still was angry about the time Ino made her think she had swallowed a poisonous flower. It had made her look weak as she ran to Namida-sensei, only to find out there was no such thing as Ninja Wolf's Bane. Unfortunately, even after Ino and Sakura had stopped being friends, she still couldn't go back to picking on Sakura because of Hinata. While she wasn't afraid of the Hyuga, it was generally a bad idea to pick on a girl with the resources of a major clan at her beck and call. She had been ecstatic when Fuki told her Hinata and Sakura were not talking, something the girl had overheard when Ino asked Sakura about what happened between her and Hinata. While the blonde and pink-haired girls were feuding over who would posse Sasuke, they still showed their concern for each other now and then. The last thing Amy wanted was for Hinata and Sakura to bury the hatchet unless it was in each other. The reason for this was due to the fact that pretty much every girl in their age group was targeting one boy. This led them to throw away their friendships with each other, and since there was power in numbers, which with her lackeys she had the numbers, it would allow her to be as big a terror as she wanted. Besides, she needed to get even with Sakura for being the catalyst for the embarrassing situation Ino had put her in. She would even get to use the jutsu she was planning to use on Ino. So getting up, she began walking up to Sakura, and when she felt she was close enough, acted like she tripped, bumping into her, almost knocking Sakura down. "Hey, watch where you're going, bitch," Amy yelled. "You bumped into me, dumbass," Sakura threw right back. Not bothering to say anything, Amy continued on her way, picking a secluded spot where she could manipulate what was about to happen. Happy with a spot around the corner of the school, but still close enough that she could use the jutsu she had convinced her father to teach her. Her father had been a genin during the Second Great Ninja War, and having fought against Suna shinobi several times, her father had been left with a high opinion of their puppeteer forces. So he decided to create a puppet jutsu of his own, except his would use living people. To do this he would affix chakra strings to whoever he wanted to control, but what was really impressive about the jutsu was its ability to control a person's speech and any jutsu they may have had. To do this required a small chakra needle that was placed at the brainstem of the person to be controlled and had a chakra string attached to it which ran to a similar needle in the controller's brainstem. When she had bumped into Sakura, she had easily placed the needle into the back of her neck. While not as advanced in the jutsu as her father, whom could control multiple opponents with just the one thread connect to the needle in the neck, she would need both hands to control all of Sakura's motor functions as well as her vocal cords. Sakura, unaware she was about to be controlled, made her way to Hinata. Hello Hinata, she said nervously. Sakura, Hinata replied calmly without emotion as she continues to eat her ramen, which after putting on her new jacket she had craved all day. Well, you see, that's a nice jacket, Sakura said lamely, really unsure about how to approach apologizing for the day before. Thank you, Hinata said, standing up to meet Sakura's eyes while holding her ramen bowl. You bought it to remember Naruto, huh? Sakura asked, figuring it would be a good way to broach the subject. However, after finishing her sentence she feels a little jolt at the base of her skull and began to panic as she lost control of her body. What's going on? I can't move, she thought with rising dread when she heard her voice say, well, it's missing something. What's that? Hinata asked, a little guarded after seeing something pass through the pink-haired girl's jade eyes. If she didn't know her friend better she would say malice. Which was why she was caught flat-footed when Sakura said, this, as she grabbed the ramen bowl from her and spilled its contents onto her new jacket. Seeing this, the other kids began pointing and laughing at Hinata, bring on a level of shyness and embarrassment she hadn't felt in months. All she can do is ask, why, Sakura? Did you think I'd let you get away with slapping me? Amy in Sakura's body said, her voice cold and cruel. Also, you deserve it for wanting to be like that loser Naruto. Let me guess, you want to be Hokage too, like that moron kept going on about? Amy knew this because she was in Hinata regular class this year, and at the start of the school year their instructor had asked what their goals as shinobi were. Deciding to put the nail in the coffin of the girl's friendship, she said, as if a white-eyed freak like you would ever be made Hokage. Hearing this and seeing the look of complete and utter betrayal that crossed Hinata's face, Sakura tried desperately to regain control of her body while thinking, please don't listen Hinata, it isn't me. Humiliated and crushed by Sakura's words, Hinata can do nothing to stop the tears from coming to her eyes. Not trusting herself not to sound weak and defeated, she simply fled the scene, leaving behind a gloating Sakura with a victorious smirk. As the bell rung signaling the end of the lunch period and with the entertainment over, the children made their way into the building. Once the last one enters the building, Amy disengaged the jutsu and Sakura, having not moved from the tree, fell to her knees like a puppet with its strings cut. My Sakura, who knew you had such cruelty within you, said a smug Amy. It was you. You're the one who was controlling me, shouted Sakura as she launched herself at the girl, only to receive a fist to the gut, knocking the wind out of her as she fell to her hands and knees. Smiling, Amy simply said, guilty as charged. I'll just tell Hinata. Tell Hinata what? Amy said, cutting off the distraught girl. That it wasn't you, that you were being controlled. As if she'll believe you. Besides, what is your excuse for what happened yesterday? Are you going to tell her I was controlling you then too? Why? Sakura asked, defeated. Well, to get even, of course, Amy answered, enjoying the tears coming to Sakura's eyes. Sakura sobbed, I've never done anything to you. Maybe not directly, and I really rather have used this jutsu on Ino, but it was worth it to drive a wedge between you and Hinata. Amy then stated, after all they say payback's a bitch. She then delivered a quick kick to Sakura's ribs, and I'm the bitch. Taking her leave of the crying Sakura, she thought with satisfaction, today was a good day. Meanwhile, for Mizuki, the day was shaping up to be anything but good. He was not happy with the course his life had taken. After months of toiling as a genin, he had finally pulled a C-ranks courier mission that would allow him out of the village without attracting undue attention, as he was sure the Hokage's eyes were still on him, only to make it to Tanzaku town to find no money waiting for him in his secret account. What was making his life almost unbearable, though, could be laid at the feet of one man, the Anbu Black Ops member Dog. Mizuki was on his way to receive a mission from him now. The Anbu had seemed to have made it his life's mission to make Mizuki as miserable as possible without laying a hand on him. For instance, Dog had once had him clean out the Anbu headquarters shower stalls with a toothbrush that looked suspiciously like his. Needless to say, when he got home that night he threw his out despite it showing no sign of having been used for such a purpose. Approaching training ground 7, he caught sight of the Anbu with his nose in a book that he was rarely seen without lately. Deciding to get this over with as quickly as possible, he said, "What do you want, Dog?" "Ah, Mizuki, right on time," Dog replied politely while closing his book. "Can you explain what task it is that I have to perform today?" Mizuki snapped, not in the mode for Dog's usual laid-back attitude. "Perhaps you want me to cut all the grass in the training fields with a pair of scissors?" "That's not a bad idea," Dog said, the smile evident in his voice, "but not today. Today I thought you could help me with a little training. Don't you think taking on a mere genin is a little easy for an Anbu Black Ops member?" asked Mizuki, a little worried at fighting the man. "I don't think of you as a simple genin, Mizuki," said Dog, his voice hardening, losing its previous cheer. "But it isn't me you'll be facing," Dog said, the merriment once more in his tone. Making his way over to the memorial stone, he placed an alarm clock on it and turning to Mizuki he said, "Here, catch." Mizuki snatches what was thrown out of the air and looking in his hand saw 2 bells. "And who will be trying to get these from me?" he asked, well aware of what the bell test is. Cutting his finger, Dog said while making hand signs, summoning jutsu. Mizuki's eyes widen at seeing all 8 members of Dog's nin dog pack. He was about to complain when Dog said in a bored tone, "The sun will set in a little over 6 hours, my pack has that long to get the bells from you. Are there any questions? Shouldn't I be wearing some sort of padding?" Mizuki asked while eyeing the growling dog's teeth and claws. Zabuza was currently sitting in a bar waiting for the contact he had made during his time in River Country. The contact, a man by the name of Hisoka Guan, is in his mid-20s, with the good looks that people in his line of work needed to get by, and generally wore expensive suits. What's more, he was almost never seen without a designer visor. He was also over an hour late, which was making Zabuza quite angry, especially due to the fact that he felt naked sitting there with his face uncovered and without his sword. Unfortunately, he would have to continue to just sit there and wait until the prick arrived. Zabuza had quickly learned that when it came to working as a missing-nin, men like Hisoka were necessary annoyances. Sure, there were plenty of people willing to hire a missing-nin, but they were just as likely to turn on him once the job was done. It wasn't like he could report them to a better business bureau if they screwed him out of money. In addition, all it would take was for them to get word to the right people and Hunter Nin would be all over him. Hisoka acted as a middleman. He was sent the job information and he would get in contact with the appropriate missing-nin. Furthermore, he dealt with all the money supplying the ninja with his cut beforehand, in most instances. That way, if the person offering the job reneged on payment, it was his problem. Zabuza had to admit the man was good at what he did, having secured several high-paying missions for him in the past. So with nothing to do until the man arrived and drinking only enough so as not to attract suspicion, he thought about his companions. Haku had come a long way since he had first taken him in. At 11 years old, had he attended an academy, he probably would have already made chunin. Also, ever since the attack by the Hunter Nin over a year and a half ago, he has been way more focused. It was like night and day. When he wore the mask, he took off the dead Hunter Nin. When the mask was off, he was a cheerful boy who still enjoyed playing with that stupid rabbit, but when it was on, he was the weapon that Zabuza wanted. Although he still didn't enjoy needlessly killing and would often only incapacitating his opponents even if it made his task more difficult. Then there was Naruto. After finally understanding what was slowing the boy down, Zabuza was able to teach him many of his more powerful jutsu. Also, Naruto's growth was fantastic due in part to the fact he never gave up, often training to the point that Zabuza would have to force him to stop before he collapsed from chakra exhaustion. However, with this growth came a glaring problem: he was running out of ninjutsu to teach Naruto. It wasn't as bad with Haku due to the older boy having to basically teach himself how to use his Kekkei Genkei. But Naruto had no such ability, and unfortunately Zabuza was only 21 when he was forced to flee Kirigakure, which limited his own growth. Moreover, creating jutsu took time, which he did not have if he was going to raise the money for a second coup d'état. He had managed to score some scrolls from various opponents he defeated, however very few of them were any higher than C-rank techniques, but that didn't seem to bother Naruto in the slightest. All he would have to say is I'm teaching you a new jutsu and it could be some lame E-ranked one, but Naruto would still get all excited demanding to be taught. Looking up to scan the room again, he spotted his contact making his way towards him at a leisurely pace. He was wearing his visor, despite the bar being dark already. Also his black hair was parted down the middle and he was wearing a long black overcoat over his silk business suit. Sitting down and smiling at him with a smile that Hisoka probably thought was personable, but really just made Zabuza want to punch him in the face, the middleman says, "Sorry I'm late, my main man." "Forget it," Zabuza growls, not interested in the man's fake platitudes. "Do you have a job for me? My main man, I have got you a cakewalk of a job with a client that has deep pockets," Hisoka says, rather pleased with himself. Leaning forward in interest, Zabuza says, "Do tell." "Well, the job is a simple heist. The client wants you to steal a jewel in the possession of a rich man named Monkut Zaman," Hisoka says, leaning in conspiratorially. "Never heard of him. What's so special about the jewel?" Zabuza asks. "Hell if I know, my main man. I just know that the Mark keeps it on display in his mansion here in River Country and that it's called the Heavenly Reward." Hisoka says, then stops to take a sip of his drink. Setting the glass down, he continues, "However, there is one catch as well as a condition on this job." Sitting back in his seat, Zabuza says, "I knew it sounded too good to be true. Now hold on, my main man, and hear me out." Seeing Zabuza give him a little wave to go on, he says while pulling out a folder containing the job information, "The catch is you'll only get a fifth of the payment up front." Zabuza looks like he is about to explode at that, so he quickly carries on. "But considering that is enough to pay for a C-rank mission, which let's be honest this is, you shouldn't be complaining. And the condition?" Zabuza wonders, little dollar signs in his eyes. "Considering a fifth of this job's pay is C-rank, all of it would be well over S-rank. You have to steal it by the next full moon, which is in a week." Hisoka says, smiling, seeing that Zabuza is drooling over the idea of the huge payday. Zabuza, pulling himself together, asks, "Why is your client willing to bankroll so much for such an easy mission?" "I don't know and I don't care, my main man." Hisoka explains like he has been asked the dumbest question he has ever heard. "His money is good, that's all I care about, so whether it's to avenge a wrong or pure greed, I just hand out the missions." "So are you interested?" Zabuza mulls it over. The truth is he doesn't like it. This job almost sounds to perfect, however in the end his greed wins out, so he says, "Just have my money the day after the full moon." Not bothering to finish his drinks, Zabuza gets up and takes the folder from the table. Hisoka leans back into his booth after watching Zabuza leave. 10 minutes later, a man that had been sitting at the bar the whole time sits in the seat Zabuza vacated. The man asks, "Did he take the job?" "Of course he did," Hisoka says while pulling a cigarette out of his golden case. Lighting it, he takes a drag and leans his head back to look at the ceiling. One thing all missing-nin have in common is the lust for the big payday, and Zabuza has it more than most. "When should my master be expecting him then?" the man asks. "By the next full moon," Hisoka answers. "Couldn't you have picked a shorter time frame? 7 days is a long time for a ninja to prepare?" the man asks, a little concerned. "Of course I could have. Of course, I could have just told him to show up tonight at 7 and not to be late, because otherwise he will not fall into the trap that is set for him," replies Hisoka, annoyed this peon is questioning his methods. "What does it matter? Your master's trap has caught all the other missing-nin I've sent his way." "I suppose you're right, forgive me." The man gets up and hands Hisoka an envelope containing his pay. After the man takes his leave, Hisoka orders another drink and while waiting for it wonders if he did the right thing. Not due to any guilt, but to the fact that missing-nin of Zabuza's caliber don't come along every day. After all, Zabuza was one of his best operatives, but then again there were always more waiting to replace him. It just might take a while, that's all. 9-year-old Hinata was on her way to visit Naruto's grave. It had been almost 2.5 years since he disappeared into the river, and with no sign that he was still alive, the Hokage had declared him official dead on the 2-year anniversary. With one of the only people that she knew of hoping for his survival giving up, it made her doubt he was still out there. She had heard that the civilian council had put up a serious fight about having Naruto's headstone in the cemetery. The only reason they had any say in the matter was due to the fact that Naruto was not recognized as a shinobi, therefore was not able to be buried with them. The matter had only been resolved when her father had stepped in and bought the burial plot at 4 times the going price. It had pleased her that her father was willing to do that for her rescuer. On the day of the funeral she remembered that it had rained as if the very heavens were sad at his passing. Almost no one had attended. The Hokage was there of course, as was an Anbu Black Ops member she assumed was the Hokage's bodyguard, Iruka sensei, and her father. She had also spotted a large man with white hair off in the distance. Whether or not he was watching the funeral she couldn't say. The fact that Sakura hadn't bothered to show up angered her almost to the point where she was about to march to Sakura's house and drag her there to offer at least a single prayer to Naruto. Only the knowledge that Sakura's mother, who had recently been elected to the council seat for her district and had personally led the charge against Naruto's inclusion in the cemetery, had stopped her. Thinking of her former friend, she wondered how things had gone so wrong so quickly between them. They had both seemed to agree to give each other a wide berth, going out of their way at times to avoid each other. The few times they had been forced to work together by Namida-sensei had been pretty awkward, with Sakura looking guilty, wanting to apologize, and Hinata only saying enough to get the job done. Needless to say, nothing had been resolved between them. Approaching his grave marker, she smiles at the daffodils that were planted shortly after his funeral. While she had never met the person who did it, she was pleased to know someone else cared. Even if the person who was paid to take care of the graves didn't, sighing at seeing the shabby state of Naruto's burial plot when compared with the ones around it. She had complained to the groundskeeper for all the good it did. The ignorant man had just blown her off while telling her not to tell him how to do his job. One day when she became Hokage, her and the groundskeeper were going to have a nice long discussion about what proper maintenance of Naruto's gravesite entailed. Although coming here to take care of his resting place, at least in spirit if not in body, did make her feel closer to him. Kneeling down to wipe off the dirt that accumulated on his gravestone, she says, "Hello Naruto, I'm sorry it's been so long since my last visit, but school has been so hectic lately. However, it's summer break now." Pulling out a canteen she filled before coming sure that if she didn't the flowers would die due to lack of care. "Oh, guess what, I won the Kunoichi of the Year award for our age group. Father was quite pleased and told me to continue to bring honor to the Hyuga. My cousin Neji is Shinobi of the Year for his. You remember I talked about him before," she says while tracing his name with her fingers. "The truth is I think father would be less impressed with my award if he saw the competition there was for it. It seems my fellow Kunoichi have all lost their drive to be stronger. Instead all they do is fight over who Sasuke Uchiha likes best. I think the answer is he doesn't like anyone. He's just gotten so dark, ever since his brother murdered his clan, and of course that makes them want him even more. It's just so silly." Finishing her chore she smiles, "That is all that's new with me Naruto. I know I say this every time but," she says while standing up and then bowing slightly, "thank you." As Naruto follows Zabuza and Haku through the branches on the way to the mansion they were going to rob, he has a minor sneezing fit. Haku decides to tease him a little by saying, "You know what that means, right Naruto?" It means the moron shouldn't be training in the rain like I told him not to," Zabuza says, agitated at the idea that one of his weapons may be coming down with a cold right before they were going to infiltrate the mansion. Naruto at least looks slightly embarrassed at the rebuke as he says, "I told you I was sorry, but I was so close to mastering the water dragon jutsu." "Yeah, and how sorry are you going to be if you give us away because of a sneeze, brat?" Zabuza counters. "I'm fine, besides I've never been sick in my entire life." "I think Haku's right and it means some pretty girl was talking about me," Naruto says. While thinking of one or two he was hoping kept him in their thoughts. "Stop your daydreaming, knucklehead, we're closing in on the mansion so keep your wits about you," Zabuza orders. "We'll scope out the place and then make our move at 3 in the morning." Both boys nod their heads in acknowledgement. The plan was simple. Once they snuck into the house they would approach the display room for the jewel. Based on the map of the room provided by Guan, there was only 2 long hallways to and from the room. One was located on the 2nd floor of it and went deeper into the mansion. The other was on the 1st floor and could be reached from the main entrance. The later was the one they were aiming for due to the fact that their hand-drawn map didn't cover anything deeper into the mansion. Coming to the edge of the forest they stopped, and looked at the place they were about to rob. Mansion didn't do it justice, it looked like a castle. It consisted of 3 pagoda-style buildings surrounded by a 20-foot wall. The largest of the buildings was 5 stories tall and slightly to the rear of the other 2. The other 2 buildings were each 3 stories tall and not nearly as large, Also, the fronts of the two buildings were facing each other so that all the main entrances opened into the central courtyard. While the wall would pose no problem for the trio making it to the main hall would. Zabuza figured that at least one of the smaller buildings housed the guards. So if they were discovered, things would get ugly very quickly for them. The sun was just about to set, so they would wait until the appointed time, when they figured the guards were not as alert, to make their move. Once it was time to go, Zabuza gave them the hand sign to move out. He didn't even need to look back as he dashed over the wall while avoiding the guards on patrol. He might have given Naruto a hard time earlier, but now that it was mission time, he knew the boy was 100% focused. Besides, Naruto had taken to the silent killing technique like a fish to water. If he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be. Coming to a stop at the corner behind the smaller building to the right of the main one, Zabuza peeked out to look at the main entrance of the central building. Unfortunately, the guards on duty to either side of the door were still too alert for a frontal entry. Also, there were too many patrols that passed in front of the main doors that the guards would be missed before they could get to the jewel. He had considered having Haku and Naruto henge into them, however he would rather have them with him in case something went wrong. Giving the hand sign to let them know they were going to use their secondary entry point and that Haku should go first followed by Naruto, he then goes back to watching the guards. Haku then quickly made a break for the right side of the main building. Upon reaching it, he climbed to the second story of the building using his chakra. Once on the tiles of the ledge, he peers into the window they had marked as their backup route into the building. Seeing that no one is in the room, Haku checks the window to make sure there are no alarms or seals on it to prevent its opening. Sure that there are none, he opens the window and makes his way inside. Naruto, seeing Haku go into the window, waits for a pair of guards, walking around the perimeter of the main building, to disappear around the back of it before he also runs for the window. Once inside, he sees Haku crouched down near the door for the room with it open just a crack and using a hand mirror formed from ice to scope out the hall. Pulling the mirror back, Haku looks behind him and sees that Zabuza has joined them in the room. Holding up one finger to let Zabuza know the number of guards in that branch of the hallway, nodding his head in understanding, he points first to Haku and slashes his finger across his neck. Then points to Naruto. The boys acknowledge the silent order by switching places so that Naruto can exit the room first. Naruto then slowly opens the door the rest of the way, then quickly and silently takes off down the hall towards the guard. However, the guard notices him coming, but before he can shout an alarm, he is silenced by a pair of senbon needles hitting his neck. Naruto prevents the guard's body from hitting the floor and raising an alarm. Dragging the body back to the room he came from and depositing it on the bed, he gives Haku a grin, noticing he is looking away from a glaring Zabuza who is upset the boy didn't outright kill the guard. Not commenting on Haku's lack of killer instinct for now, Zabuza once more takes point with Haku covering the rear. Making their way down the hall, they stop at the door at the end of it. Slowly opening it, they are greeted by a lavish main hall, with an ornate chandelier that is almost 4 stories tall hanging from the ceiling at the 5th floor and finally ending at the floor they were on. Looking up, he could see that each floor opened up and circled the main hall. Although, what he didn't see was guards, and that fact bothered him. Ignoring it, he makes his way down the center staircase towards the door marked on the map. Zabuza didn't like that the map they were following was based on what the client supposedly remembered from a time he was here, but thus far it had proven accurate enough. Finding the door that leads to the display room, they open it slowly but see no signs of guards in the hall. By now the lack of guards really has begun to bother him. Surely this Mongkut Zaman wasn't so big a fool as to believe the guards he had wandering outside would be enough to protect this jewel from being stolen. Hell, a normal thief would have been able to get this far without problems. Furthermore, as they made their way deeper down the hall, it felt like they were heading underground. It wasn't a real noticeable effect, and if the client who drew the map was a civilian, he might have missed it, but a trained ninja wouldn't. His instincts were screaming at him to forget about this job and to return the money he had gotten in advance. However, he couldn't, not now. As a missing nin, the only thing he had going for him was his reputation. If he backed out of this job, that would be shot. Who would hire a ninja that backed out of a job without any real sign of trouble? Knowing his only real option was to continue, he presses on until he notices a light at the end of the hall. Coming to a stop at the end of the hall on one side and Naruto doing it on the other side, they each slowly scan the half of the room they can see. Zabuza is struck by the room's design. It is a huge round room with a dome ceiling. The walls and floor are made of the same gray stones as the hallway they took to get there. The second story of the room is just a 5-foot walkway that has the other door the map described. Also, the walkway doesn't appear to go all the way around the room due to at the far edge of the room near the other entrance the wall appears to be uniform, instead of indent back to allow room for people to walk like the rest of the second floor, with some painting hanging from it depicting some grisly sacrifice. Seeing a jewel resting on a pedestal at the far end of the room under the painting, Zabuza motions for the boys to stay put while he retrieves their prize. As he makes his way toward the jewel, Haku steps up to where he was to continue watching the side of the room Naruto can't see. Once he reaches the pedestal, he notices that the jewel is an exquisitely crafted fake. Immediately turning for the door he came from, he tries to dash for it only for 3 sections of the ceiling to fall. The large center section hits the lower floor and the other 2 sections fall on the sides of the center one, blocking his escape along the second floor. "Welcome Zabuza," a voice says over a speaker box, "it is time for you to collect your heavenly reward." Turning back, Zabuza sees that the painting has risen up and that the uniform section of the wall was in actuality a viewing box on the second floor. Looking down on him is a man in his mid-40s dressed in a fine robe and sitting in an ornate chair holding a glass of what Zabuza assumes is some type of expensive liquor. "I thought that in situations like this you were supposed to say, 'Welcome to my parlor,'" said the spider to the fly. Zabuza asks, "You have no idea how quickly that gets old," the man replies while smirking. It isn't just the man's words that put Zabuza even further on edge due to being caught in this trap. It's the calm demeanor that tells him that not only has the man used this trap before, but that he's used it enough that it has become routine. Zabuza looks behind him towards the wall that is now blocking his retreat, gauging its thickness to be at least 3 feet and knowing only one of his more powerful jutsu would bring it down quickly. However, without a water supply, even with his elemental affinity being water, the attempt would leave him drained. His best hope for escape that way would be for either Naruto or Haku to pound on it with their techniques. Naruto could use the air bullet jutsu that he had learned from a scroll Zabuza had taken from a dead sand nin, and Haku could just punch through it with his ice. Speaking of the boys, they were taking their sweet time and knocking down that wall. As if reading Zabuza's thoughts, the man gloats, "Your 2 young companions are currently too busy to be coming to your rescue, I'm afraid. They are at this moment facing off against my men." Zabuza, ignoring his concern for the boys, says, "So I take it you are Zaman." Putting his left hand to the top of his forehead and giving a mock salute, Zaman replies, "Indeed, I am. So you fed Guan false information about this job in order to lure me into your trap for the bounty on my head?" Zabuza growls while reaching over his shoulder for the handle of his blade. Zaman rears his head back, laughing at the question. Waiting until he can compose himself, he answers, "More like Guan fed you the false information for you to fall into this trap. But don't take it too personally, you weren't the first. You see, eventually missing-nin like you outlive your usefulness for him and then he sends you here. So is this the part where your guards burst through the door?" Zabuza asks while pulling the executioner's blade in front of him. "Oh no, no, no," Zaman replies. As he does so, the door slowly opens, revealing a muscular man appearing in his mid-30s. He is shirtless while wearing white baggy fighter pants and black fighter slippers. He is bald except for the top of the back of his head, where a long braided ponytail extends reaching to his lower back. Around the upper part of his left arm is tied a headband with the symbol for the Hidden Rock Village. While the man had made his entrance, Zaman had continued taunting Zabuza. "You see, my little enterprise here has one more silent partner. The Tsuchikage provides me with the muscle to take missing nins of your skill down, and in return he gets to study the secrets your body contains before I ship your head off to the Mizuki for the reward. Burikwasu here is the instrument of your death," he says, pointing to the massive man who had jumped down from the ledge to join Zabuza in the lower portion of the room. "I just so love watching you ninjas duke it out, which is why I added this viewing box," Zaman states while refilling his glass. With that said, the rock nin attacked. Meanwhile, on the other side of the wall that had slammed down, Naruto and Haku were having a hard time with things. As soon as it came down, the boys had rushed to it, trying to find a way through. However, before they could nail it with jutsu, they heard another slamming sound. Looking behind them, they saw that the floor at the entrance they came from had risen up and was blocking their exit. Then, hearing an unlocking sound, they saw 2 hidden doors on the upper level open up and dozens of men armed with a variety of weapons entering and dropping down to their level. The two boys begin to fight off their attackers while watching each other's back. Naruto, after fending off a sword strike with a kunai, says, "You know Zabuza's going to bitch about how soft-hearted you are, right? I think he will be yelling at both of us for that." Haku replies, smiling beneath his hunter's mask, having to dodge a crossbow arrow from one of the later arriving guards, who are around the ledge on the upper level trying to pick off the two young shinobi. "I don't know what you are talking about," Naruto says, having dispatched the man attacking him with the sword. Quickly turning toward the man who shot the arrow at Haku, he fires off his air bullet jutsu at the man, catching him in the chest, lifting him off his feet and bouncing him into the wall behind him. "Well, it's just that it seems the opponents you have beaten thus far are still breathing, Naruto." Haku replies while sending a pair of senbon into an attacker's neck. "Well, if that isn't the pot calling the kettle black," Naruto says, but then sighs. "I guess if we survive this, it's going to be a long night of blah, blah. You can call yourselves real shinobi after bathing yourself in the blood of your opponents, blah, blah. Those soft hearts of yours are going to be the death of you and, more importantly, me. You know Zabuza means well. He is just trying to prepare for the hardships we'll face," Haku says, chuckling despite the situation, sending a kick into an axe-wielding guard, shattering his kneecap. "Yeah," Naruto says, looking up and seeing more guards jumping into the room to replace the men who have been incapacitated. "More importantly, don't you think it's time you make with the ice?" "I'm afraid I can't," Haku states. "What?" Naruto exclaims. "Have you tried using any water jutsu?" Haku asks, avoiding a pair of guards with swords. "No, you know my primary element is wind. I need a good water source to use them," Naruto says while delivering an axe kick to the top of a guard's head he knocked to the ground, sending him into unconsciousness. "Well, my Kekkei Genkai requires me to use both water and wind. However, somehow they have blocked my ability to use the water element," Haku states. "My guess would be those markings that have appeared along the walls." Looking at the wall and seeing the glowing marking, Naruto theorizes out loud, "They must be for Zabuza. If they knew our affinities, they would have blocked them too." "I don't think that is wholly it," Haku says, having been forced back to back with Naruto while being surrounded by guards. Even without his ability to use water jutsu, whoever set this trap can't expect guards of this level to bring down a member of the Seven Swordsmen, and from the sounds of battle coming from the other side of the wall, he is facing at least one ninja. "What, we don't raid a ninja?" Naruto shouts. "It appears not, which is why they didn't bother to check what our affinities were and block them as well," Haku states. Naruto's fists tighten around the kunai he is wielding as he growls, "I don't know about you, Haku, but it pisses me off to be underestimated." "Don't let it bother you, Naruto," Haku says calmly. "Once we defeat these guards, we should be able to find a way to disrupt this barrier and help Zabuza." "Well then, let's get to it," Naruto yells while charging the nearest guard. The boys continue to fight well, however, against so many opponents, eventually a mistake would happen for the guards to capitalize on. That mistake was Naruto blocking a blow with his kunai by a massive guard swing a war club. While he prevented it from hitting him, the force of the blow knocked him off his feet. Quickly recovering, he did not see one of the guards with a crossbow taking aim and firing. Although Haku did, and acting on instinct pushes Naruto out of the way, taking the crossbow bolt in the side. Looking back, he sees Haku face down on the ground with an arrow sticking out of his side. As the feeling of rage begins to overflow from him, he sees the guard who fired the arrow reloading his weapon. Feeling a sudden surge of power that is familiar, he reaches to the crossbow wielder, sending out a red claw of chakra which wraps around the stunned man. Pulling back, he sends the horrified guard flying towards him, and with his free hand cuts off the screaming guard's head when he is close enough. After the dead guard's body hits the floor, the room is covered silence. It is broken by Naruto's growl of, I'll kill you all." Attacking the war club guard, who was as stunned as the rest when the blonde boy began to be covered in a red cloak of chakra, he tries to slash the man with his chakra claws. The guard, who comes out of his stupor as Naruto launches himself at him, brings his club up to block and succeeds, only for the claws to cut through it like it wasn't even there, leaving vicious gashes across his face, sending the man to the floor holding his ruined face. Before Naruto can finish the screaming man off, several more guards attack him, whom he quickly dispatches. Turning his attention to the crossbow-wielding guards on the second story, he makes a swinging gesture and the chakra claw extends out, smashing into them as it follows his motions. The guards hit the ground on the first floor, some falling badly, breaking arms, leg, and even necks. Those who had survived the fall don't live long as Naruto pounces on them, finishing them off. Turning towards the sound of the blocked entrance opening, he sees the guard whose face he ruined near a secret panel take off down the hallway. He is about to follow when he hears a weak and Naruto. Naruto looks towards a weak Haku, his mask having fallen off after hitting the floor. While he sighs at seeing Haku is alive, the look on the dark-haired boy's face is a mixture of shock, amazement, and fear. The look of fear on Haku's face pierces Naruto's heart like a knife, but he pushes by it, seeing no more guards are on the way, and knowing Zabuza is still more than likely still in danger, he raises his arms to the wall that had slammed down, cutting them off from Zabuza. Sending red chakra claws to anchor into the wall, he pulls back and then like a slingshot launches forward, smashing into the wall like a red cannonball. Zabuza for his part was having a really tough time with his opponent. He had deduced that the markings that had appeared on the wall were responsible for his inability to use any water-based jutsu. He had tried at the start of the fight by using his hidden mist jutsu, only for nothing to happen. While he liked to think he was a well-balanced ninja, never relying too much on his jutsu, they certainly made life easier. The rock nin he was facing obviously was not fighting under such impairment. This became apparent when Zabuza had attempted to cut him down with a vicious overhead strike. The ninja had caught the executioner's blade with the palm of his hand, making a sound like cutting into solid rock. The rock nin had then tossed the blade along with Zabuza across the room like they weighed nothing. Rising back to his feet, Zabuza thinks, how the hell am I supposed to beat a guy who can't be cut and my most powerful jutsu or denied to me? If I die here, I can already hear Heishiro-sensei's lecture waiting for me on the other side about specializing in only one type of elemental jutsu. Vowing not to die if only not to hear a speech from his dead sensei, Zabuza sends a volley of kunai at his opponent. However, to his surprise, instead of letting them hit and bouncing off of him, the rock nin avoids the majority. The few that come close he blocks with his arms. Trying to buy time to think on what that means, Zabuza taunts, "Not much for conversation, are you? There is no need to converse with the dead." The rock nin named Burakwasu replies before charging at Zabuza again. Zabuza avoids the punch Burakwasu throws by jumping to the second level, noticing the small crater the man's fist left in the wall Zabuza's back had been against seconds earlier. Launching off the second level floor, he tries to jump toward the viewing box window to capture Zaman, forcing the man to let them go. But while in midair, he has to use his sword to block a large piece of stone the rock nin throws at him. While his sword blocks it, the impact is enough to throw off his trajectory, preventing him from reaching the smug-looking man. Landing short of the viewing box on the first floor, Zabuza's thoughts turn towards the boys. Haku and Naruto must be having a hard time. I'll have to step up their training if simple guards are giving them this much trouble. Looking at the rock nin, he continues, but then again, who am I to talk when one punk rock nin can force me into a corner? Alright, what do I know? Apparently his skin is literally rock hard, and judging by that hole in the wall, he has some serious muscle behind those punches of his. Burakwasu again launches a flurry of punches at Zabuza. Seeing a slight opening, Zabuza attempts to slash his side, only for the rock nin to block again with his arms and then sends a kick into Zabuza's chest. Getting up slow, Zabuza formulates a plan based on the information he has on his opponent while thinking, as I thought that hardening jutsu only works on his arms, the rest of him is normal flesh. Reaching into his back pouch for a smoke bomb to blind his opponent, allowing him the opportunity to use his silent killing technique. However, before he can pull it out, he feels a familiar yet different sinister chakra flare to life. Zabuza begins to panic. Did the rock nin have a Jinchuriki partner? Was that what the boys were fighting on the other side? Zabuza knew the power such men could wield, having felt it himself on the day he had attempted to kill the fourth Mizuki. He and his fellow conspirators had the fight won before the Mizuki erupted in a sickly sea-green chakra. After that, all he had managed to do was escape with his life. Most of those who went with him hadn't even did that. However, looking at the rock nin quickly puts this thought to rest as he sees the man looking at the wall separating the room, telling Zabuza whatever was happening on the other side was not part of the plan. Zabuza is about to capitalize on his opponent's distraction when a small explosion bursts from the wall. As the dust settles, he can see a glowing red chakra source at the center of the smoke. Once it is clear enough to see, Zabuza's eyes widen in surprise as Naruto stands there surrounded in red chakra, resembling some beast with ears and a single chakra tail behind him, swinging wildly. Naruto first locks eyes with Zabuza before turning his attention to Burakwasu and with a loud roar speeds off at him on all fours. The rock nin, recognizing the new threat, quickly runs through hand seals and then spits up a giant mud wall. Naruto hits the wall at full speed and easy crashes right through. Landing in crouch, he sees no sign of the man. Burakwasu appears behind, about to deliver a tremendous punch, but before he can launch it, the tail turns into a hand and grabs the rock nin by the head, lifting him into the air. The hand tightens around the rock nin's head, crushing it, and then throws the body away, only for it to turn into rock, revealing it as a rock clone. A shadow then appears over Naruto, who quickly spins out of the way of the descending man as the mist blow shatters the floor where he had been standing. Naruto responds by sending another claw after the man, who for his size nimbly evades them. However, it finally is about to connect with his chest, forcing him to cross his arms to protect himself. As the claw makes contact with his arms, it clamps down, preventing him from moving them. The last thing Burakwasu hears before being cut in half along his torso is, "Did you forget I was your opponent?" Zabuza says while taking advantage of Burakwasu arms being tied up. Zabuza then looks at Naruto. He is silently afraid the boy cannot tell friend from foe. However, he sees the fear in the boy's red eyes. Zabuza is about to speak when they hear the door on the second level opening and a panicking Zaman, having left his viewing box, swiftly entering the hallway and then slamming the door closed while locking it. Naruto, seeing the bastard most likely responsible for the trap and Haku getting hurt, not to mention making him reveal his secret, jumps up to the second level and after ripping the door from its hinges sends a chakra claw after the retreating man. Snagging him, he begins to retract it. Zabuza, hearing the screaming Zaman as Naruto pulls him towards him, realizes in his anger Naruto plans to kill the man. However, he knows that when the boy calms down, every life he has taken will weigh heavily on his conscience. Not willing to let the boy add to his burden, he jumps to the second level and places his blade across the entrance, so when Zaman hit it, he is split in two parts. Naruto discards the half he held onto after Zaman passed the blade. He then refuses to look at Zabuza, afraid of what he'll see. As he calms and the cloak recedes, he whispers, "Haku's hurt." Zabuza quickly drops to the ground, making for the hole that Naruto made in the wall. Upon reaching the other side, he is shocked to see the level of carnage. Looking around, he spots Haku propped up against the wall with an arrow in him. Kneeling in front of the injured boy, he tells him to brace himself as he pulls the arrow out. Moving in and out of consciousness, Haku whispers, "Is Naruto okay?" "He's fine," Zabuza replies firmly. "Rest, Haku." Glad that the wound wasn't fatal, Zabuza goes back through the hole and sees Naruto checking Barakwasu's remains for weapons and scrolls like Zabuza taught him. Seeing Naruto stuff a few items into his pouch, he calls out to him, "Time to move out, Naruto." Making his way back to Haku, he gently picks the boy up and carries him out of the mansion, a solemn Naruto behind him. Stopping long enough to pick up Haku's mask, he makes sure no one tries to attack them from behind. The trip back to the camp is quiet as Zabuza decides to wait until later to confront Naruto about the discovery he is a Jinchuriki. Once they reach their camp, Naruto sets down the items he removed from the corpse of the rock nin, as well as the mask, and then quickly runs off into the forest. Zabuza is about to call out for him when Haku, who regains consciousness, says, "Zabuza, what happened? Where are we?" "We're back at camp. As to what happened, you were sloppy enough to get hit by an arrow." Zabuza replies, still looking into the forest. It all coming back, Haku suddenly sits up. "Where's Naruto?" "After I was hit." Stopping the thought and remembering how he reacted when he felt the red chakra, he states, "I have to apologize." Turning to Haku and holding him down, Zabuza says, "Calm down. I patched up your wound, but I'm no healer, you can tear it back open. Besides, what do you have to apologize for?" When Naruto began emitting that chakra eye, Haku pauses to collect himself before continuing, "I was afraid of him." Sighing at the boy, Zabuza states, "Haku, you were at ground zero for one of the most menacing chakras I've ever felt. Hell, I was on the other side of the wall, and even then I was worried. Be that as it may, I should never have doubted Naruto. He is my friend, and those guards he killed, he did it to protect me." Haku calmly replies while shrugging off Zabuza's hand and standing up. He slowly makes his way in the direction Zabuza had been looking at. Zabuza lets him go, knowing how pig-headed Haku can get when he feels the need to do something. Naruto was sitting in the wood worrying about what his future held. Would Zabuza and Haku abandon him? The idea brought tears to his eyes. Also, all the lives he took began to overwhelm him. He had killed before, but when he used the red chakra it felt different, almost like he enjoyed it. Then there had been Haku's reaction to it. Was he afraid of him now? The idea that his friend hated him and may reject him like the Leaf villagers was too painful to put into words. Hearing footsteps approach, he looks and sees Haku making his way towards him. Knowing his friend shouldn't be standing, he says, "Haku, you should be resting." Smiling weakly, Haku says, "I know, but first I wanted to say, I'm sorry." "Sorry? What are you sorry for?" asks a confused Naruto. "It was my fault you were hit by the arrow in the first place. I wish to apologize for how I reacted to you when you used that chakra. I will admit when I first felt it and saw you attacking the guards you frightened me," Haku says. Upon seeing the fear that appeared in Naruto's face, he knew he made the right decision in coming out here to talk to him. He then continues, "However, I should never have doubted you. These past few years you have never given me any reason to believe you are anything but a good friend, and whatever that power you used today was, you used it to protect me." Haku's words put Naruto at ease. He says appreciatively, "Thanks, Haku. You've used that power before, haven't you?" Haku asks, now curious about what Naruto's hidden power is. Sighing, Naruto says, "Yeah, 2.5 years ago was the first time I used it." Quickly realizing what Naruto was implying, the day the Cloud Nin attacked. Seeing Naruto nod his head yes, he continues, a little hurt about not being trusted with Naruto's secret. "Why didn't you tell us about it?" "I was afraid," Naruto says. Seeing Haku giving him time to collect his thoughts, he continues, "All my life I was alone, except for the old man, that is, and when I used the chakra the first time I thought I finally understood why." Haku is about to point out his own history but stops when Naruto holds up his hand, stalling his reply. Naruto carries on saying, "I know about your own past, Haku, but Kohona didn't believe that about Kekkei Genkai and they still ignored my existence. I was afraid that if even the people of Kohona were afraid and hated this power, that everyone would. I just wish I knew what it was. It's the power of the tailed beasts." Zabuza's voice cuts in. Both boys look up to see Zabuza appear from behind a tree. "Haku, the sun is coming up, get some rest," he orders. "But I would like to hear," Haku tries to say. However, he is cut off by Zabuza. "I'll explain it to you later. Now, get some rest." Accepting that Zabuza isn't going to take no for an answer, he begins to make his way to camp, but is stopped by Naruto saying, "Haku, I'm sorry too. I should have trusted you more." Nodding his head in recognition of the apology, he leaves the two alone. Looking at Naruto, Zabuza says, "So you're a Jinchuriki, huh?" "A Jinchu, what?" Naruto asks. "A Jinchuriki," Zabuza replies. "The word has no real meaning, it was made up to describe people who had the tailed beast sealed into them." "Why would they do that?" Naruto asks, interested and excited to finally have an answer to the question that had plagued him ever since first tapping into the power. "To create weapons, of course," Zabuza easily replies, noticing the grimace that passes across Naruto's face. "Although, I doubt that was the reason in your case." "Why's that?" Naruto wonders, hoping it's true that he is more than just some secret weapon of Konoha's. "Well, because you had no idea of what you were, for one," Zabuza states. "Also, if you were going to be some weapon of Konoha's, you would have been kept under careful watch. Furthermore, it just doesn't seem to fit with the image Kohona likes to portray. Then why seal one in me in the first? Was this the reason that I was always alone? Did that hate me because to them I was just some sort of freak?" Naruto yells as tears come to his eyes, remembering the cold gazes of the villagers. "The answer's been there all along, brat. You were just missing a key piece is all," Zabuza claims. "Well, I still don't see it," Naruto huffs, crossing his arms over his chest, and though his face is covered by wraps, Zabuza can see him pouting. "You never were any good at using your brain, you knucklehead," Zabuza says, a small smile gracing his lips that, due to being covered by his own wraps, Naruto can't see. "When's your birthday?" "October 10th. Okay, now what significant event happened on that day 9 years ago?" Zabuza asks, trying to give the boy a clue. "That's easy, the Kyuubi Atta." "Oh," Naruto says, a flashbulb suddenly lighting in his head. "So the 4th Hokage sealed the 9 tails into me to stop it." "Exactly, it was probably some last-ditch effort to stop the beast," says Zabuza. "As far as to why well, I heard they need to be sealed into children, it was probably just your bad luck to have been born that day." How do you know so much about Jinchuriki? Naruto asks since Zabuza had never really struck him as the scholar type. You know the man I want to kill, right? Naruto nod his head to Zabuza's question. Seeing this he continues, he's a Jinchuriki too, he contains the three-tailed turtle. Slightly afraid of the answer but needing to ask he says, do you want to kill him because he's a Jinchuriki? Putting his hand on Naruto's shoulder to comfort the boy, Zabuza says, no, I don't hate him for that. I hate him because he's a bastard who had my sensei killed right before my eyes and has led my home to ruins. He's the one who kicked off the civil war that led to the destruction of Haku's clan and so many others. Well, maybe he was treated just like me and grew to resent people. Naruto counters, for some reason feeling a need to defend someone who may share his pain. Unlikely, from the time he was born he was the third Mizukage's favorite. So much so that when the third Mizukage disappeared, a bastard in his own right who created the distrust that led to the many civil wars the land of water has suffered, he was handed the title of Mizukage, raw anger entering his voice, remembering the man he had once served but now one day was going to surpass. You must have really loved your sensei, huh? Naruto asks, smiling up at Zabuza. Hell no, Zabuza says, a small smile just visible under his wraps. Sitting down on a log he continues, he was the most stubborn, tyrannical man who ever walked the earth. But he took an untrained monster like me that had just killed 100 academy students and forged me into a man worthy of being one of the 7 swordsmen of Mist. A group he formed during the reign of the first Mizukage. Wow, he must have been ancient, Naruto says, having assumed a cross-legged sitting position across from Zabuza. Yeah, but the old buzzard still had the moves when he needed them. He was always telling us tales about how Kiri used to be under the time of the first and second Mizukage. That was before the third showed up and killed the second, assuming his place, Zabuza states. Before that, Kiri was nowhere near as violent. Hell, it was almost more pacifist than Konoha. Why didn't anyone stop the third then? Questions Naruto, not understanding why people would not fight such a man if the village was as nice as Konoha. Well, as Heishiro sensei put it, the young were tired of peace and wanted to taste the fruits of war, having missed out on the first great shinobi world war and the third Mizukage delivered. Heck, he admitted he was as guilty as everyone else, wanting to test his skills against the finest the shinobi world had to offer. Hell, when Heishiro sensei drank he'd tell us all tales about how he fought against the third Hokage. Zabuza smiles thinking about all the times Heishiro would tell the same story over and over again, embellishing it a little more each time. He sounded so cool. What happened to him? Naruto asks. He was betrayed by one of his own swordsmen. A fish-faced freak by the name of Kisame claimed that he overheard him talking about rebelling and returning Mist to the way it was before the third Mizukage. Zabuza says, his voice hardening, remembering his sensei's final moments. While it was true that Heishiro sensei was tired of what Kiri had become, he would never have openly rebelled. He believed the only way to change Kiri was through the system. So with nothing more than that asshole's word, the fourth Mizukage had him executed. Not going into all the gory details to spare Naruto, his mind replays the events. How he was summoned to the Mizukage's office and saw his sensei trussed up and beaten. Being informed of the charges by the Mizukage and then having to stand there watching as Kisame carried out the sentence, slowly slicing him to ribbons. To the tough old bird's credit, he never once screamed or cried out, instead silent stood there, never breaking eye contact with the man many considered his protege, Zabuza. He could still remember the exact moment when Kisame was no longer cutting into a living man but into the meat that had contained his soul. It was at that exact moment that Zabuza had decided to bring down the Mizukage. Preferable after removing Kisame's shoulders of the burden that was his head. That's enough talking for tonight, brat, Zabuza says, rubbing his jaw, not used to talking so much. I want you to go watch over Haku while I'm gone, understood? I'll probably be back late tomorrow. Where are you going? Naruto questions, getting up and heading back towards camp. I'm going to see a man about a job and scrounge up some medical supplies. As the sun set on the day after the full moon, Hisoka Guan was living it up at a gentleman's club called Club Kit Kat. On either side of him were two of the scantily clad women who worked at the club. He had been blowing through money since entering the establishment, and it didn't seem like he was going to stop anytime soon. Curiosity getting the better of one of the ladies, she asks, "You sure do have a lot of money to spend tonight, Mr. Guan. You recently come into some." "You could say that," Guan says with a drunken smile. "A dear friend passed, leaving me with quite the windfall." "Oh, how sad," the greeter says in her sweet voice. Waving off her concern he says, "Well, if he didn't die I wouldn't be here spending my money on you now, would I?" "Seems you have a problem then, because your friend didn't die," a voice says from in front of him. Taking his widening eyes off the women he had been talking to, they settle on a seething Zabuza. Trying to play off his surprise he says while standing, "Zabuza, my main man, I wasn't expecting you, so, you are K." However, Zabuza silences the man with a quick jab to the throat, knocking him back into the couch he had been occupying. His anger radiating from him, Zabuza says, "I can understand you betraying me, after all it is the way of the shinobi world." Reaching behind him and gripping the handle of his blade he says, "But you screwed up when your little trap almost cost the life of one of my boys." Swinging the blade down through the man and not stopping till it passed all the way to the floor he shouts, "See you in hell, my main man." Leaving the scene of carnage he created as the women Guan had been entertaining begins screaming as the two halves of him and the couch split, falling onto each other. He thinks, "Cammy, I've wanted to do that since meeting that bastard. Now to kick in some doctor's door and take him to Haku. Going to rustle up some medical supplies, i.e. kidnapping a doctor." Zabuza takes off, contemplating whether or not it would be best to leave the land of rivers for some time. Now, padding will only slow you down. Think of it as incentive not to be caught, Dog said, and despite having on his Anbu mask Mizuki can see his famous eye smile. Reaching down, Dog hit the top of the clock and said, "Now let's begin." 6 hours later Mizuki arrived at the memorial stone, thoroughly convinced that the dogs were solely after him, not the bells, covered in scratches, bleeding, and with several severe bite marks. He sighed at hearing the alarm go off seconds later. He then fell to the ground in a heap, panting. Dog looked up and closed his book, walking over to Mizuki as his pack lined up nearby. Dog noticed that Mizuki still had the bells with him and in an amused voice said, "Well done, Mizuki. I'm glad I decided to test my nin dogs today. After all, if a mere genin can avoid them for so long, then it is obvious they need more training. We'll try harder next time," the smallest of the dogs said, and then they all disperse into smoke. Already walking away, Dog called over his shoulder while giving a dismissive wave, "Well, until next time, Mizuki." Lying there on the ground, while trying to work up the energy to go to the hospital and have the worst of his injuries looked at, Mizuki thought, "I wish he'd just go ahead and kill me." After the impromptu training with water clones that morning, Zabuza then had them pull up camp. They were going to head towards the land of rivers. Naruto was a little nervous about the journey due to if they went by land they would have to skirt the land of fire. However, Zabuza informed him they were going to go by boat. After walking all day they were all sitting around a fire at the moment. Naruto was pulled from his thoughts when Zabuza said, "Naruto, you never answered my question this morning, you could go back." "Do you want me to?" Naruto asked, a little worried at the answer he may get. "That's your call. I just want to make sure before putting any more effort in your training that you are willing to live the life of a missing nin. You got a taste of what is in store for us yesterday." The truth was, Naruto had been debating whether or not to go back all day, although he had made up his mind a little while earlier. So to give his answer he said, while shaking his head, "No, I'm going to stick with you." Seeing the surprise on Haku and Zabuza's faces he continued, "I gave you my word that I'd help you in your ambition. Besides, it would probably look good on my record that I helped to beat a cage." Zabuza, satisfied with Naruto's decision, said, "Well then we'll have to do something about your face. Now that we know Kahona is looking for you, those markings will make you easy to identify." Reaching into his backpack, Zabuza pulled out some of the combat wraps that he used for his own face and tossed it to Naruto. "Here, wrap this around your lower face." Naruto attempted to do so, but he had trouble doing it by himself, so Haku went over and after tying the wraps up said, "Now you look like a little Zabuza." Naruto smiled at the comparison, although you can only really tell by his eyes. While Zabuza frowned and said, "The brat looks nothing like me, Haku." Naruto stuck out his tongue at Zabuza, which resulted in a wet spot appearing on the wraps where his mouth was. Zabuza ignored this and said, "Alright, that's enough chit-chat for the night, go to bed, I want to be on a boat for river country by sundown tomorrow." Both boys got up and went to their sleeping bags, falling asleep shortly thereafter. Leaving Zabuza awake to think. He had been glad that Naruto decided to stay, but also surprised. The life of a missing nin was hard after all. Even Zabuza would have chosen to go back to Kirigakure if the option was on the table. The idea that the boy would stay because he gave something as trivial as his word was laughable, although it was also a little refreshing. He had been living so long with death and deception that Naruto at times seemed to be like a breath of fresh air. The only time he had ever felt anything remotely similar was when he had been in Kiri and that had been with her. However, thoughts of the happier times at the Hidden Mist village and the woman he spent them with would have to wait. Right now he needed to come up with a plan of action for when they reached river country. This heading to the local watering hole for work wasn't cutting it. He'd need to get in contact with someone who could set him up with the big paydays. So with thoughts of how to find such a person on his mind, Zabuza settled into a comfortable position to get some sleep himself.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.